Hey bro, after 6 years of a bad relationship with my father, I finally fixed it with him and continue to plan to build it further. He said he was proud of me after 18 years. It's a pivotal moment, man. Congratulations. Everybody should repair their relationships with their fathers if they're not on good footing. You don't know the kind of shit your old man went through and things that got passed down to you, bad, traumatic sort of personality traits. Your father was just another man too that probably dealt with childhood trauma, passed it down onto you unknowingly. It's not entirely their fault. You just have to understand where your old man came from and how he grew up. We'll answer a lot of questions for you. Let's begin.
I've been trying to understand the underlying psychology of postmodernism and its relationship with neo-Marxism, and then the spread of that into the universities and the effect on the culture. And what I would like to start with is a description of your understanding of that, because I've presented.
I remember watching this a few years ago, I think is when they did this episode. 5 years ago. Yeah, I watched this a while back, and they get into some super interesting stuff regarding men and women, modern society at large, and I recommend everybody see this interview.
To the people who are listening to me, my understanding of it. I interviewed Stephen Hicks recently, and he wrote an interesting book called Explaining Postmodernism, which I liked quite a bit. It's been criticized for being too right-wing, although I don't think he's right-wing at all. I think maybe you could characterize him as middle-of-the-road conservative, but I would say he's more like a classic liberal. But I'm really curious about your views about, what postmodernism is, first of all. I know you've identified it with the general tricksters, Derrida and Lacan and Foucault in particular you've talked about, but I'd like to know what you think about postmodernism and also why you think it's been so attractive to people.
Well, my explanation is that there is no authentic 1960s point of view in any of the elite universities, okay? But rather, the most liberated minds of my generation of the 1960s did not go on to graduate school. I witnessed this with my own eyes. I saw genuine Marxists, okay, at my college, which was the State University of New York at Binghamton, upstate New York, Harper College, which had a huge cohort of very radical downstate New York Jews, okay, who, in fact, Harper used to be called Berkeley East. So I saw genuine passionate Marxists with my own eyes. They were not word choppers. They were not snide postmodernists. Okay? They were in-your-face aggressive. They used the language of the people. They had a populist energy. Okay? They dressed working class. They were non-materialistic. Okay? These are people who lived by their own convictions. They were against the graduate schools. Okay? When I went on to graduate school and it became known that I was going to go to Yale, I was confronted by a leader of the radicals on campus in broad daylight in front of everyone, who denounced me for, he said, grad school is not where it's happening. You don't do that. And if you have to go to graduate school, you should go to Buffalo. Now, I had applied to SUNY Buffalo because the great leftist critic Leslie Fiedler was there, who had a huge impact on me. He created identity politics, but without its present distortions. Right? And Norman Holland, the psychoanalytic critic, was there. I would have been very happy to have gone on to Buffalo, but I needed the library at Yale, so I continued on to Yale. There were no radicals in the graduate schools, okay? From 1968 to 72 when I was there. There was only one radical, Todd Gitlin, okay, went on to have a career success. Okay? The actual radicals of the 1960s, okay, either dropped out of college and went off to create communes, right, or they were taking acid and destroyed their brains. Now, I have also written about that, the destruction of the minds, okay, of the most talented members of my generation through LSD. It was going on all around me. Right? So what's happened is the actual legacy of the 60s got truncated. The idea that these post-structuralists and postmodernists are heirs of the 1960s revolution is an absolute crock. Okay, what they represent, as Foucault shows, Foucault said, okay, that the biggest influence on his thinking, okay, was Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, okay, which was a post-World War II play written in Paris that was about the disillusionment and nihilism experienced after Hitler went through occupied France, right, and all of Europe was in ruins. It had nothing to do, what's in Waiting for Godot has nothing to do with the authentic legacy of the 1960s, which was about genuine multiculturalism, a movement toward India, toward Hinduism, a transformation of consciousness through psychedelics, which I did not take, but which I identify with totally through the music, etc. Right? It was a turn toward the body. It was a turn toward sensory experience, okay? Not this word chopping thing and this like cynical removal from actual experience, right? That French import, okay, came in, okay, to the graduate schools. It did not affect any genuine 1960s person. The real 1960s revolution was about Jung. It was about a way of seeing the cosmos in mythological terms, right? And the Jungian contribution went on into the New Age movement of the 1970s, aside from the universities, right? So who took over the universities were these careerists. Okay? I saw them with my own eyes. I saw what happened. I was at Yale.
That's a very important distinction she's going to make here about how colleges got radicalized. How progressive thinking, and I mean like actual progressive thinking, not the woke progressives we have today, how these government types ended up taking power in these higher institutions and all the curriculums, and they infected everything with basically what we have today. I guess they label them postmodernists, where essentially there's no male, female, it's just a human being that's a blank slate that can be programmed into anything.
When Derrida was being shipped over, okay, to address the students, the grad students, and the faculty, and I said to a fellow student after hearing one of these guys speak, it wasn't Derrida, it was another one of the theorists. I said, they are like high priests murmuring to each other. This was an elitist form from the start. Okay, it was not progressive. It was not revolutionary. It was reactionary. It was a desperate attempt to hold on to what had happened before the 1960s sensory revolution. But this postmodernist thing, okay, this trashing, okay, of the text, this encouragement, okay, of a superior and destructive attitude toward the work of art. We're going through it, okay, primly with red pen in hand, finding all the evidence of sexism, check, racism, check, homophobia, check. That is not the empathic, emotional, okay, sensory-based, okay, revolution of the 1960s. Right? I am sick and tired of these people claiming any kind of mantle from the 1960s. They're frauds. These people are. What happened in the 1970s was a collapse of the job market in academia. Right? All of a sudden, the jobs were scarce, and this thing was there, the new and improved and shiny thing, okay, to be a theorist. Okay, people seized on it. Okay, it was institutionalized, right? And it's an enormous betrayal of the 1960s. Okay,
so that you touched on this idea of the destruction of the.
She's like the only feminist you'll ever respect, pretty much. She's an OG. Her view on the world is pretty damn based. When she talks about male and female hierarchies and then how men and women were living separate lives, yet intertwined, really good.
The work of art. You know, and one of the things
I think they get into it in this interview.
I really liked about reading Nietzsche was his discussion of ressentiment, right, of resentment. And it seems to me that a tremendous amount of the motive power that drives the postmodernist, let's call it, it's not a revolution, transformation, seems to me to be driven by resentment about virtually anything that has any, well, what would you say, any merit of competence or aesthetic quality. And I don't know if it seems to me that that's partly rooted in the academics' disdain for the business world, which I think is driven by their relative economic inequality, because most people who are as intelligent as academics are from a pure IQ point of view make more money in the private sphere. And so I think that drives some of it. But there also seems to be there's a destruction, an aim for destruction of the aesthetic quality of the literary or artistic work. It's reduction.
Yeah, so some people in the chat are like, she's nuts, whatever. No, she isn't. She got canceled by Femmes today. They boycotted her. They're trying to kick her out of her tenure in college because she's against almost everything going on today, everything that's being perpetuated in culture today.
To nothing but some kind of power game. And then surrounding that, the reduction of everything to something that approximates a power game, which I can't help but identifying with jealousy and resentment as a fundamental motivator. Does that seem reasonable to you?
These professors, okay, who allege that art is nothing, okay, but an ideological movement by one elite, okay, against another group, right? These people are Philistines. Okay? They're Philistines. They're middlebrow, hopelessly middlebrow. Okay? They have no sense of beauty. They have no sense of the aesthetic. Now, Marxism does indeed assert this. Okay? Marxism tries to reconfigure the universe in terms of materialism. It does not recognize any kind of spiritual dimension. Now, I'm an atheist, but I see the great world religions as enormous works of art, okay? as the best way to understand the universe and man's place in it. I find them enormously moving. They're like enormous poems. Right? What I have called for, the true revolution, okay, would have been, okay, to make the core curriculum of world education, the world, okay, the great religions of the world. I feel that is the only way to achieve understanding, and it's all.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that? Imagine pushing for the core curriculum in schools today, foundationally, to be religious teachings. Not in a literal sense, like you can believe some guy built a boat and took one of each animal, but the lessons therein are extremely valuable for the framework of society. There you go.
Also a way to present the aesthetic, okay? Because I feel that the real 60s vision was about exaltation, elevation, cosmic consciousness, okay? All of these things were rejected, okay, by these midgets, okay, intellectual midgets who seized on to Lacan, Derrida, and Foucault. Right? My career has been in the art schools, my entire career, beginning at Bennington College. Right? So I represent a challenge to this from the perspective of art. Right? It is an absolute nonsense, okay, as post-structuralism maintains, that reality is mediated by language, by words, everything that we can know, including gender. It's absolutely madness, because I'm teaching students whose majors are ceramics, okay, or dance, okay, who are jazz musicians, who understand reality in terms of the body, sensory activation. Okay? So what happened was something was going on in the art world as well. I identify with Andy Warhol in pop art. Okay, that was what was going on during my years in college. Everything about Andy Warhol was like, wow. Admiration, wow. What happened immediately after that in the arts, 1970s, okay, was this collapse into a snide sort of postmodernism also. This happened in the art world, right? And it was an utter misunderstanding, okay, of culture, it seems to me, by that movement in the art world. That is, oppositional art, in my view, is dead, okay? It's been, what postmodernism is a pathetic attempt to continue the old heroism of the avant-garde. The avant-garde was genuinely heroic from the early 19th century, okay, where we're talking about, the Courbet, the realists, we're talking about Monet and the Impressionists, people who genuinely suffered for their radical ideas, their innovations, and so on. Right? Going right down to Picasso and down to Jackson Pollock, who truly suffered, okay, for his art. It was only after his death, okay, that suddenly the market was created for abstract art. Pop art killed the avant-garde. The idea that the avant-garde continues is an absolute delusion of the contemporary art world, okay, which feels that it must attack, challenge, okay, the simplistic beliefs of the hoi polloi. Okay, it's somehow the art. Okay, from the moment, okay, Andy Warhol went through and embraced the popular media instead of having the opposition to it, the serious arts that had. Okay, that was the end of oppositional art. Okay, so we have been going on now for 50 years. The postmodernism in academia is hand in hand with the stupidity and infantilism that masquerades as important art at galleries everywhere. This incredible, it's mechanism of contemporary art, pushing things that are so hopelessly derivative. And with this idea that, once again, that the art world somehow has a superior view of reality. The authentic leftism is populist. Okay, it is based in working class style, working class language, working class direct emotion, an openness and brusqueness of speech. Okay, not this fancy contorted jargon of the pseudo leftists of academia who are frauds. These people who manage to rise to the top at Berkeley, at Harvard, at Princeton. Okay, the idea that these people are radical. They are career people. They're corporate types. Okay, who succeeded in. And they love the institutional context. They know how to manipulate the bureaucracy, which has totally invaded and usurped. Okay, the academia everywhere. Okay, these people are company players. They could have done well in any field. Okay, they love to sit in endless committees. They love bureaucratic regulation and so on. There's not one leftist, okay, in American academia raised his or her voice against the obscene growth of tuition costs, which have bankrupted a whole generation of young people. Not one voice, okay, to challenge that invasion by the bureaucrats. Okay, absolute fascist bureaucrats. Okay, they're cancerous. Okay, there's so many of them. The faculty have completely lost any power in American academia. Okay, it's a scandal what has happened. Okay, and they deserve the present servitude that they're in right now. Okay, because they never protested. Okay, yes. My first job at Bennington College, 1976, I was there when there was an uprising by the faculty against encroachment by the Board of Trustees and the president. Okay, and it was a huge thing. It was reported on the New York Times and so on. And we pushed that president out. Okay, and
for those that aren't aware, she's breaking down the radicalization of higher education and everything she's saying right now that was happening in her time is basically fully formed in the world we have today, where most administrators and higher ed leaders are essentially these corporate types that bend the knee to who. They follow directives from on high, where it used to be, at least in this country, in America, and most of the West in general, that the higher ed, even the administrators, were usually populist, for the people, always against business, big government. And then somehow, which she explains, we had this switch where these snakes came in and basically usurped what used to be progressive thinking. And it happened in media as well. You notice that we're reporters and the mainstream news, where it actually used to be about keeping the government in check. It used to be a check for democracy, that you would air out things like the Pentagon Papers, right? Instead now, that kid, that young guy that had whatever Discord and he leaked the Pentagon Papers, I believe it's the New York Times. I don't know for sure. Don't quote me on this. Whatever news organization he linked the files to actually ratted him out to the FBI so he can get caught, because obviously mainstream media today is in bed with the alphabet agencies and the government as a whole. How nutty is that? That you would drop information that's, yeah, they work for the government, information that is important for the population to be privy of, and how the inner workings of the government have been corrupted and your democracy is dying in the dark, that your rights and your freedoms are slowly being eroded, that this machine has swallowed up media, has swallowed up higher ed, has co-opted this reach for power with big tech, and we're all going to be left at the bottom, broke, dumb, and propagandized with absolutely nothing to fight back. It's top-down tyrannical control. This machine is being built around us. And she breaks it down, man.
And there's not been a single uprising of that kind against encroachment by the trustees and by the administrations in all these decades. Okay, passive, slaves, they deserve their slavery.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've thought the same thing about university professors for a long time, is that they get exactly what they deserve because they never stand up and say no. And the fact that in the United States, it's not quite as bad in Canada, I wouldn't say, but the fact that the students have been essentially handed a bill of indentured servitude here for their student loans is absolutely beyond comprehension. You know, it seems to me that the bureaucracy has...
Yeah, how wild is it that? Where can I donate to support your channel the most? I know YouTube takes a cut of your content. Locals, always. They give you over 70%. It goes mostly to the creator. Thank you, Captain. It's astounding that in America, you can graduate with a mortgage on your back for a job that no longer exists. And the tragedy of it is when you apply for this job, entry-level jobs will tell you something akin to, you need 2 years experience for an entry. An entry-level job needs experience. How the hell are you getting this experience when you're in school? You just graduated. You have no job experience. So you can't even get the job that you went to school for. Now you're in crushing debt from this insane mortgage payment on your back that you can't discharge in court with a bankruptcy, by the way. Thank you again. Votes for the people, right? You are forever in debt. You cannot discharge it. You must pay your student loans back. That's a scam. That's a scam. Most of these ballooning budgets for these higher education, all these universities, is administrators. It's not even the professors. It's not for the students. The curriculum hasn't improved. We're too busy creating safe spaces and pushing propaganda. Again, universities in America have lost their prestige in the world, man. Unless you're going to absolute top tier engineering schools, anything to get a degree that requires something like a board, passing the board, something of that nature, a professional degree, you're almost guaranteed to waste your time going to school today. You're better off going in the trades, to be honest, starting your own business, leveraging the internet to make passive income, or not even passive income, remote income. Chaotic Sonic, thank you, brother. I really appreciate your content. It's been both entertaining and educational. I also have some meme effects that you might like to add to the soundboard. Please send them in an email, tribeofmen@yahoo.com. Appreciate you, man.
has basically conspired to determine how to pick the pockets of the students' future.
See, look, that's Stephanie with this comment. It's mind-blowing. When the pandemic hit, can't even say that word, C word, my son had to take classes remotely. His tuition actually went up. Explain that to me logically, how tuition rises when kids are joining on a Zoom call.
Earnings, right? And they do that by offering them an extended adolescence with no quality control, something like that. So it's a real bargain with the devil.
And a total abandonment of any kind of education, actually, in history and culture. All right, that's gone along with it. That is the transformation into a...
And don't get me started on the scams. This just hit me. Books. How expensive are the books that you're forced to buy every year that has the same exact goddamn text the book from last year had, with just a few things rearranged. So now it's considered the new edition. And your teacher makes you get the damn books. So you're spending hundreds on stupid ass books that you could have used from the year prior. You can't even buy the used book from the year prior because it won't make it for the curriculum.
cafeteria kind of a menu, okay? We can pick this course or that course or this course without any kind of guidance from the university about a central core curriculum that teaches you history and chronology and introduces you to the basics, right? Because our professors are such prima donnas, they can only teach in their little areas. So we have this total fragmentation, okay? The great art history survey courses are being abandoned steadily, okay? Why? Because graduate students are not trained to see the great narratives, because we are taught now that narratives are false.
Okay, so that's another issue that I'd like to bring up, because one of the things
Yujiro, do you do crypto, and what site or app do you trust? I'm not in crypto at the moment, and if I was, I'd only buy Ethereum or Bitcoin. That's it. I don't trust any small cap.
cannot figure out is the alliance between the postmodernists and the neo-Marxists. I can't understand the causal relationship there, because tell me if you disagree with this, okay? Because I'm a psychologist, not a sociologist, and so I'm dabbling in things that are outside of my field of expertise, and there is some danger in that. But the central postmodernist claim seems to me that because there's a near infinite number of ways to interpret a complex set of phenomena, which actually happens to be the case, that you can't make a case that any of those modes of interpretation are canonical. And so if they're not canonical, if that canonical element isn't based in some kind of reality, then it serves some other master. And so the master that it hypothetically serves for the postmodernists is nothing but power, because that seems to be everything that they believe in. They don't believe in competence. They don't believe in authority. They don't seem to believe in an objective world, because everything is language mediated. So it's an extraordinarily cynical perspective that because there's an infinite number of interpretations, none of them are canonical, you can attribute everything to power and dominance. Okay, so that seemed like a reasonable summary of the
Yes,
postmodern.
exactly.
Okay.
So it's a radical relativism.
Okay, it's a radical relativism. Now, but the strange thing is, and so what goes along with that is the demolition of grand narratives. And so that would be associated, for example, with the rejection of thinkers like Jung and Erich Neumann, because of course they're foundational thinkers in relationship to the idea that there are embodied grand narratives. That's never touched. But then, despite the fact that the grand narrative is rejected, there's a neo-Marxism that's tightly allied with postmodernism that also seems to shade into this strange identity politics. And two things. I don't understand the causal relationship there. Like the skeptical part of me thinks that postmodernism was an intellectual camouflage for the continuation of the kind of pathological Marxism that produced the Soviet Union, and that has no independent existence as an intellectual field whatsoever. I still can't understand how the postmodernists can make the no grand narrative claim, but then immerse themselves in this grand narrative without anyone pointing out the evident contradictions. Like, I don't understand that. So what do you think about that?
Well, I can only speak about literary professors, really, and they seem to me, almost universally in the U.S., to be very naive. They seem to know nothing about actual history, political science, or economics. So it's simply an attitude. They have an attitude. Marxism becomes simply a badge by which they telegraph their solidarity with a working class that they have nothing to do with. Right? I mean,
and generally nothing but contempt.
Yes, and the thing is that the campus.
Yeah, that's the elite liberal virtue signaling we see today, where it's the savior complex. They use Marxism as a way to virtue signal and say that they're for the people, and we got to fight for these progressive woke ideologies, yet they are essentially NIMBYs, not in my backyard, where they don't want those policies where they actually live. You know, we want to push these progressive ideas, but do that shit for the poors over here off to the side. Not in our neighborhood, though. Oh, you want to build high-density, affordable housing for poors? Just not on our block. You can do that. We're going to block all legislation to make that happen.
Leftists are almost notorious for their rather snobbish treatment of staff. I mean, they don't have any rapport with the actual working class members of the of the infrastructure, the janitors, and and even the secretaries. There's a kind of high and mighty aristocracy. These are people who have wandered into the English department, right, and were products of a time when, during the new criticism, when history and psychology had been excluded. Right? I mean, my ambition was, I love the new criticism, as a style of textual analysis, right? And the new criticism had multiple interpretations, that were possible, and that were encouraged. In fact, one of the great projects was Maynard Mack's series, 20th Century Views, where you had at least books. I adored them in college. It was about Jane Austen, or about Emily Bronte, or about Wordsworth, and they were collections of alternate views of the same thing. The idea that there were no alternate views and there was no relativistic, situational kind of an interpretive approach is nonsense. But the point was, we needed to restore history to literary study, and we needed to add psychology to it, because there was great animus against Freud. And when I arrived in graduate school, in fact, I actually went into the director of graduate studies and protested the way Freud and Freudian were used as negative terms, okay, in a sneering way by the very WASP professors. Right? So we needed to, and actually it seemed like we were moving there. Okay? In the early 1970s was a great period of psychobiography about political figures. Okay? And so I thought, it's happening. And all of a sudden, it all got short-circuited by this arrival, of post-structuralism and postmodernism in the 1970s. Right? So I feel I'm an old historicist. Okay, not a new historicist. So I think new historicism is an absolute scam. Right? And it's just a way. It's like tweezers. You pick a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that. You make a little tiny salad. Okay, and somehow this atomized thing, okay, is supposed to mean something. It's all to me very superficial, very cynical, very distant. I am the product, okay, of old historicism, of German philology. At its height, my first choice of a profession when I was a child was Egyptology, archaeology. Everything I ever think about or say is related to an enormous time scheme, okay, from antiquity and indeed from the Stone Age, right? And that is the problem with these people. They're mal-educated. The postmodernists and academic Marxists, okay, are mal-educated, embarrassingly so. Okay, they know nothing before the present. Right. Foucault, okay, is absolutely a joke before the Enlightenment. Okay, perhaps he might be useful to people to talk about what happened after neoclassicism, which, by the way, he failed to notice. Okay, a lot of what he was talking about, okay, turns out to be simply the hangover of neoclassicism. Okay, this is how ignorant that man was. I mean, he was not talented as a researcher. He knew absolutely nothing. Okay, he knew nothing about antiquity. How can you make any kind of large structure, large mechanism, to analyze Western culture without knowing about classical antiquity? Okay, he did not see anything. This was a person who had no business making large theoretical statements about anything.
Well, maybe part of it is that if you generate an intelligible doctrine of radical relativism, then there is no reason to assume that there are distinctions between categories of knowledge or between different levels of quality of knowledge, right? So I've seen the same thing in the psychology departments, although we have the, what would you call it, the luxury of being bounded at least to some degree by the empirical method and by biology, right? It's one of the things that keeps most of the branches of psychology relatively sane, because the real world is actually built into it to some degree. But if you accept the postmodernist claim of radical relativism, then you completely demolish the idea that there are quality levels that are associated with education, because everything becomes the same. And that seems to me to be a perfectly reasonable justification for maintaining ignorance. Like Foucault, I actually found him the most readable of the Lacan, Derrida, Foucault triad. You can read Foucault. I read Madness and Civilization and a couple of his other books, and I thought they were painfully obvious. The idea that mental disorder is in part a social construct is self-evident to anybody who has even a smattering of psychiatric training. I mean, the real narrow medical types tend to think of a mental disorder, let's say, as something that might be purely biological. They have a pure disease model, but nobody who's a sophisticated thinker ever thinks that. It's partly because medicine is a brand of engineering, not a brand of science, because it's associated with health, and the diagnostic categories are hybrids between physiological observation and sociocultural condition. Everyone knows that, and so when I read Madness and Civilization, I thought, well, that's not radical, that's just bloody self-evident. But
Foucault's admirers actually think that he began, the entire turn toward a sociological, grounding of modern psychology. The social psychology was well launched in the 1920s, for example. The levels of ignorance. These people who think Foucault is so original have not read Durkheim. They've not read Max Weber. They've not read Erving Goffman. Okay, so in other words, to me, everything in Foucault seemed obvious. Okay, because I had read the sources from which he was borrowing without attribution. So I mean, again, I know these people. I mean, I've met, in some cases, knew them in graduate school. People who went on to become these admirers of Foucault, Lacan, Derrida. And I know what their training was. Their training was purely within the English department. That's all they ever knew. They never made any research outside of that, right? And so the idea, Foucault is simply this a mechanism. It's like a little tiny kit by which they can approach everything in culture. But the contortions of language, the deliberate, labyrinthine, elitist language, at the same time as pretending to be a leftist, okay, this is one of the biggest frauds ever practiced.
So I got a story to tell you that you might like, because I've thought a lot about that use of language, because language can be used as camouflage. And so here's the story. I think I got this from Robert Sapolsky.
All the doublespeak, all the 1984 we have going on today, the use of language. If you guys haven't read 1984, you should, because it's scarily accurate. And A Brave New World as well. We're currently in an amalgamation of both.
So he was talking about zebras. And zebras, of course, have stripes, and hypothetically that's associated with camouflage. But it's not a straightforward association, because zebras are black and white, and they're on the veldt along with the lions. The lions are camouflaged because they are grass-colored, but the bloody zebras are black and white. You can see them like 15 miles away. So biologists go out to study zebras, and they're like making notes on a zebra, and they watch it, and then they look down at their notes, and then they look up, and they think, I don't know which zebra I was looking at. So the camouflage is actually against the herd because a zebra is a herd animal, not an individual. And so the black and white stripes break up the animal against the herd, so you can't identify it. So this was a quandary for the biologists, so they did one of two things. One was drive a jeep up to the zebra herd and use a dab of red paint and dab the haunch of the zebra, or tag it with an ear tag like you use for cattle. The lions would kill it. So as soon as it became identifiable, the predators could organize their hunt around that identifiable animal. That's why, there's the old idea that lions and predators take down the weak animals, but they don't. They take down the identifiable animals. So that's the thing, is if you stick your damn head up, you get picked off by the predators. And so one of the things that academics seem to do is congregate together in herd-like entities, and then they share a language, right? And the language unites them and also keeps them, as long as they share the same set of linguistic tools among themselves, they know that there isn't anybody in the coterie that's going to.
So what he's essentially saying is, imagine the woke community on the left that create in-groups and shield themselves from criticism by the language they use. For example, cis. When they call normal people cis male, cis female, that already creates a division between them and then all the others. Oh, these stupid, what's wrong with the cis? They have a whole subreddit called What's Wrong with the Cis, something like that. Marginalized groups. BIPOC. I mean, they have hundreds. They've invented hundreds of words in order to shield themselves from actual conversation and a challenging one where their ideals are actually pushed back against. Because the moment you actually get into a room with these people and question their beliefs, they fold. And then they do that thing where they label you an ism, an ist, a phobe.
To attack them or destabilize the entire herd. And that seems to me to account for that impenetrable use of language. It's group protection strategy, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the search for security within a system and not the desire to expand the system.
So true. But to me, it's blatantly careerist, because it was about advancement, and it was also about the claim that somehow they have like special expertise. This is a special technical language, no one else can understand it, only we can. But what's absurd about it, absolutely ludicrous, right? That these people, these American academics, are imitating the contorted language of French translations from the French. Okay, when Lacan is translated into English, right, there's a contortion there. Okay, what he was trying to do in French was to break up, okay, the neoclassical formulations that descended from Racine. There was something that was going on. There was a sabotage of the French language going on that was necessary in France, not necessary in English. We have this long tradition of poetry going back to Shakespeare and Chaucer. We have our own language, far more vital than the French.
Oh yeah, the French constrain.
Yeah, Luxury Beliefs, that's an interesting book. Basically how the elite liberal class, the only thing they got left besides riches to virtue signal them being better than one another is by picking up some sort of social, what do you call it? Like social justice warrior ideology. Imagine your classical white liberal trying to save the black community because they know what's good for you. It's essentially what it is. Yeah, social signaling. Perfect. Exactly. So when you're a white liberal, an elite one with a ton of money, and you hang out in your echo chamber at the top of society, the only way to stand out is by picking one of these social causes and being the savior for them. I just donated to this charity I started to save underprivileged kids in the communities in my city. Yeah. While they wouldn't be caught dead living anywhere nearby them and actually gate themselves off. Yeah, moral superiority. It's virtue signaling. There's absolutely zero virtue in these people.
In their language all the time by bureaucracy.
The absurdity in amateurism, okay, of American academics, okay, trying to imitate, okay, a translation of Lacan, okay, when Lacan's doing something in France that is absolutely not necessary and indeed wrong to be doing in English. Right? So the utter cynical abandonment, okay, of the great tradition of the English departments. Right? And I felt that the true radicalism was not about adding on other departments. Okay, so we have African American studies and women's studies and so on. The true radicalism would have been to shatter the departmental structure. That's what I wanted. I feel that was the authentic revolutionary 1960s thing to do, right? To blend all.
And instead, today, we're creating safe spaces for BIPOCs. We're creating entire departments dedicated to marginalized groups. We're further dividing people into little boxes and making more and more boxes as we go. Boxes that never exist are now being created to further divide people, keep you, quote, marginalized, keep you weak, instead of what she's saying here, getting rid of all that completely. Yeah, segregation is making a comeback, weirdly enough. We need to be in our own spaces because, oh my God, white people, dangerous.
All the literature studies together, okay, to make easier, to make an interdisciplinary kind of organization, closer to the British model, where a person can pursue related subjects, overlapping subjects. These departmental models, okay, were to me totalitarian to begin with, okay, separating language into fiefdoms, and what this did to create English women's studies department, absolutely out of the air. Just snap your fingers and create women's studies. The English department had taken a century to develop. Okay, it was a huge argument within it, right?
Women's studies, gender studies. She's about to rip that.
And all of a sudden to create, a department with a politicized agenda from the start, by people without any training, whatever, in that field. What should be the parameters of the field? What should be the requirements of that field? How about biology? Okay, if you're going to be discussing gender, that should have been a number one requirement, as part of any women's studies department or program. Yes. But no, it was all.
Yeah, someone wrote segregation is now seen as success. Yeah, what's wild is when there's a bunch of articles of like bars and coffee shops in like woke parts of the country like San Francisco or Portland opening up where they're like non-cis people only, LGBTQ only, women only. I think there was a woman that was part of LGBTQ had opened a women's only plus LGBTQ bar, and I believe it failed in like record time because no men went there, obviously. And then they still blamed it on men or white people. It's absolutely wild to read. That's where we are today.
Hands off. It was just the administrators wanted to solve a public relations problem. They had a situation with very few women faculty nationwide at a time when the women's movement had just started up. The spotlight of attention was on them. They needed women faculty fast. They needed the women's subject on the agenda fast. Right? So they just like poof, let there be women's studies. Okay, and now we'll just hire some women, usually from English departments, here and there, and we'll just throw them together. You invent it. You say what it is. So that's why women's studies got frozen at a certain point of ideology. Okay, of the early 1970s. I was already in revolt from it. Okay, I was a precursor in terms of my endorsement of feminism before even now was created. Right, but I couldn't even have a conversation with any of these women. They were hysterical about the subject of biology. They knew nothing about hormones. Okay, I probably got in fistfights over this. People were so convinced that biology had nothing whatever to do with gender differences. Right?
See, that also seems to me to be related to the postmodern emphasis on power.
Yes.
Because there's something terrible underground going on there, and that is, and I think this is the sort of thing that was reflected in the Soviet Union too, especially in the 20s when there was this idea, a radical idea that you could remake human beings entirely, right? Because they have no essential nature. And so if your fundamental hypothesis is that nothing exists except power, and you believe that, then that also gives you the right, in some sense, to exercise your power at the creation of the kind of humanity that your utopian vision envisions. And then that has and that also seems to me to justify the postmodern insistence that everything is only a linguistic construct. It again goes down to the notion of power, which Derrida and Foucault and
exactly. Gender is a construct. The definition of man and woman is a linguistic construct. Nothing is rooted in biology. This is all man-made. And this is the current, what they were talking about that was happening in her time in the 60s, 70s, 80s is now in fruition today. It's what we're battling right now in 2023.
Lacan is so bloody obsessed with. And so it seems to me what they're trying to do is to take all the potential power for the creation of human beings to themselves without any bounding conditions whatsoever, right? There's no history, there's no biology, and everything is a fluid culture that can be manipulated at will. And so in Canada, there are terrible arguments right now about biological essentialism, let's say. And one of the things that happened, which was something I objected to precisely a year ago, is that the social constructionist view of human identity has been built now into Canadian law. So there's an insistence that biological sex, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual proclivity vary independently with no causal relationship between any of the levels. And so that's in the law, and not only is it in the law, it's being taught everywhere. It's being taught in the armed forces, it's being taught in the police, it's being taught to the elementary school kids and the junior high school kids. And underneath it all, I see this terrible striving for arbitrary power that's associated with this crazy utopianism. But I still don't exactly understand it. I don't understand that what seems to be the hatred that motivates it, that you see bubbling up, for example, in identity politics and in the desire to do nothing but, let's say, demolish the patriarchy. Kind of reminds me, and this is something else I wanted to talk to you about, and you're an admirer of Erich Neumann and of Carl Jung. Yeah, and that's the Neumann connection is really interesting because I think he's a bloody genius. I really like The Great Mother is a great book, and really a great warning, that book, and also The Origins and History of Consciousness.
One of my most influential books, yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I read an essay that you wrote, I don't remember when it was.
A lecture I gave on Neumann at the NYU, yes.
Yes, it's always been staggering to me that book hasn't had the impact that it should have had. I mean, Jung himself, in the preface to that book, wrote that was the book that he wished that he would have written. It's very much associated with Jung's Symbols of Transformation, and it was a major influence on my book, Maps of Meaning, which was an attempt to outline the universal archetypes that are portrayed in the kind of religious structures that you put forward. But the thing that I really see happening, and you can tell me what you think about this, in Neumann's book, consciousness, which is masculine, symbolically masculine for a variety of reasons, is viewed as rising up against the countervailing force of tragedy from an underlying feminine, symbolically feminine unconsciousness, right? And it's something that can always be pulled back into that unconsciousness. That would be, the microcosm of that would be the Freudian Oedipal mother familial dynamic, where the mother is so overprotective and all-encompassing that she interferes with the development of the competence, not only of her sons, but also of her daughters, of her children in general. And it seems to me that that's the dynamic that's being played out in our society right now, is that there's this, and it's related in some way that I don't understand, to this insistence that all forms of masculine authority are nothing but tyrannical power. So the symbolic representation is tyrannical father with no appreciation for the benevolent father, and benevolent mother with no appreciation whatsoever for the tyrannical mother, right? And that's that, and because I thought of ideologies as fragmentary mythologies. That's where they get their archetypal and psychological power, right? And so in a balanced representation, you have the terrible mother and the great mother, as Neumann laid out so nicely. And you have the terrible father and the great father. So that's the fact that culture mangles you half to death while it's also promoting you and developing you. You have to see that as balanced. And then you have the heroic and adversarial individual. But in the postmodern world, and this seems to be something that's increasingly seeping out into the culture at large, you have nothing but the tyrannical father, nothing but the destructive force of masculine consciousness, and nothing but the benevolent great mother. And it's an appalling ideology, and it seems to me that it's sucking the vitality, which is exactly what you would expect symbolically. It's sucking the vitality out of our culture. You see that with the increasing demolition of young men, and not only young men, in terms of their academic performance, which, like, they're falling way behind in elementary school, way behind in junior high, and bailing out of the universities like mad. And so,
well, the public school education has become completely permeated by this kind of anti-male propaganda. I mean, to me, public schools are just a form of imprisonment. Right now, they're particularly destructive to young men who have a lot of physical energy. Okay? Now, I identify as.
And we've seen it before in some of the other videos we covered. Boys are treated as defective girls. If you have a boy with high energy and nowhere to put it, he's seen as somebody that needs Ritalin and all this sort of focusing medication that turns him into an absolute robot. He's not himself. And that's just to control his boyish energy, which is absolutely natural. But in the school system, seen as a defect that needs to be tamed. ADHD is a defect. How many millions of young boys, probably in the United States alone, have been misdiagnosed with ADHD and turned into zombies, had their brain chemistry completely altered permanently, and have now grown into adulthood with problems because they're off the ADHD medication that they should have never been on. Instead, they should have had more engaging classrooms, more engaging teachers, more engaging systems for boys, because we know, the studies show, that boys and girls learn differently. Girls like the lecture style classrooms. They like talking. Boys like to learn with their hands, shop class, etc. This is where they excel. Yet we try to teach children this lazy, top-down, disgusting model where the teacher sits on their ass, plays a bunch of PowerPoints and pre-recorded lectures, and sits there because they can't get fired because the union, and just lets the students copy what they see on the screen. This is how I was learning when I was in school, in high school here, in middle school. I had some, God bless all the great teachers that there are, because they're really rare and they have an incredible impact on children. But most teachers are absolute dog shit today. Terrible. It's a wonder anybody can pay attention to somebody so monotone, so boring, someone that hates their job in such a manner that makes it miserable to even be in the classroom with them. It is astounding that we have to go through that school system. And if you can't focus, you're the problem. You need to be on ADHD medication. Drug them up, boys. Big Pharma needs more profits. Completely ruin a young person's developing mind with psychoactives, powerful pharmacological drugs that we don't even understand the side effects to in a growing body, in a growing mind. Scam. I would never put my kid, my young boy, when I have one, on ADHD medication because the teacher tells me that they're struggling to focus in school. Well, immediately turn that around and say, well, you're struggling to hold his attention. What's wrong with you? It's not my son's problem. Your class sucks. Period.
Transgender, okay, myself, okay, but I do not require the entire world to alter itself, okay.
Yeah, and again, I'm not shitting on, because there's good teachers, man. Somebody made a really good point. It said some teachers I had when I was young, they were complaining about curriculum they had to teach because they weren't able to keep us engaged in class. And I had those teachers too. Those were part of the really good ones, where they hated the curriculum and the way they were forced to teach. And I've had some teachers that did extra and went, above and beyond and made their class so interactive and so interesting. You actually looked forward to going to school for that class alone. That's such a rare thing, man. The ideal setup would be everybody's excited for every single class because it has an interactive nature that makes you think critically first instead of memorization first. I don't give a fuck about the dates. I don't care about the chemical structure. I want to learn why. I want to learn the how. I want to be interacting with peers and the teacher. You learn better that way. It's more meaningful that way. The experience is longer lasting.
To fit my particular self-image, I do believe in the power of hormones. I believe that men exist and women exist, and are biologically different. I think there is no cure for.
And don't get me started on teachers today. Just a few years after I graduated, it started going absolute haywire. Now you got teachers with these rainbow-colored hair, indoctrinating left and right, piercings like you won't believe. That was not allowed. You couldn't be a teacher if you looked like some of the teachers look today, talking to kids about gender ideology. Absolute madness.
Culture's ills right now, except if men start standing up, okay, and demanding that they be respected as men again.
Okay, so I got a question about that. So one of the things, we did a research project a year ago trying to figure out if there was such a thing as political correctness from a psychometric perspective, to find out if the loose aggregation of beliefs actually clumped together statistically. And we actually found two factors, which I won't go into, but then we looked at things that predicted adherence to that politically correct creed. And there were a couple that were surprising. One was being female was a predictor. The personality attributes associated with femininity, so that would be agreeableness and higher levels of negative emotion, were also both independent predictors, but so were symptoms of personality disorder, which I thought was really important, because part of what I see happening is that I think that women whose relationship with men has been seriously pathologized cannot distinguish between male authority and competence and male tyrannical power. Like, they fail to differentiate because all they see is the oppressive male. And they may have had experiences that their experiences with men might have been rough enough so that differentiation never occurred, because it has to occur, and you have to have a lot of experience with men, and good men too, before that will occur. But it seems to me that we're also increasingly dominated by a view of masculinity that's mostly characteristic of women who have terrible personality disorders and who are unable to have healthy relationships with men. Now, but here's the problem. This is something my wife has pointed out too. She said, well, men are going to have to stand up for themselves, but here's the problem. I know how to stand up to a man who's unfairly trespassing against me. And the reason I know that is because the parameters for my resistance are quite well defined, which is we talk, we argue, we push, and then it becomes physical, right? Like if we move beyond the boundaries of civil discourse, we know what the next step is. Okay, that's forbidden in discourse with women. And so I don't think that men can control crazy women. I really don't believe it. I think that they have to throw their hands up in it's not even disbelief. It's that there's no step forward that you can take under those circumstances, because if the man is offensive enough and crazy enough, the reaction becomes physical right away, or at least the threat is there. And when men are talking to each other in any serious manner, that underlying threat of physicality is always there, especially if it's a real conversation, and it keeps the thing civilized to some degree. If you're talking to a man who wouldn't fight with you under any circumstances whatsoever, then you're talking to someone to whom you have absolutely no respect. But I can't see any way. For example, there's a woman in Toronto who's been organizing this movement, let's say, against me and some other people who are going to do a free speech event, and she managed to organize quite effectively. And she's quite offensive, you might say. She compared us to Nazis, for example, which, publicly, using the swastika, which wasn't really something I was all that fond of. But I'm defenseless against that kind of female insanity, because the techniques that I would use against a man who was employing those tactics are forbidden to me. So I don't know, it seems to me that it isn't men that have to stand up and say enough of this, even though that is what they should do. It seems to me that it's sane women who have to stand up against their crazy sisters and say, look, enough of that, enough man-hating, enough pathology.
And this applies to the dating market too. It doesn't matter how many of these red pill channels, how many podcasts, how many men expose the double standards, the delusions, and the entitlement of women. It will never change until women speak to women, which the way the sisterhood is going today and how catty and greedy women are in general with one another and the amount of competition over men, I don't see that happening. Sorry. I think it would take older women with experience, and you see some videos here and there, but largely they get tossed aside as internalized misogyny and whatever other doublespeak they come up with to completely discard the argument and not have to deal with it at all. That's sad, man, because sisters need to check their own, which is what grandmas used to do, which was what mothers used to do, which is how society used to operate, where, example, in the 50s, 60s, 40s, hell, 20s, years back, men would be with men in general doing manly stuff. Women would be with women doing feminine stuff. For example, the women would all get together to go by the river, wash clothes, right? Say in some more primitive societies or even earlier than 50s, 60s. And you would have this matriarchal system within a family unit where the grandmother had absolute control over the behaviors of the mother and the grandchildren, the women, the young girls that were being raised up through the system and being taught how to be women of value to men by women that were already successful. Obviously, the matriarchal system of here are all my progeny. Why should I listen to you? I'm the grandmother. I'm the mother. You came from me. I already got a successful man, a successful life, a family. Look, here's the way. That's dead. Similar with men, how men are so lost in the world today. How many people live in multi-generational households? How many people keep in touch with their grandparents? Like, where's your grandfather to teach you a generation of knowledge, wealth, and wisdom prior to your father? That's gone. You don't hang out with your uncles? Rarely. You don't hang out with your father? Rarely. You don't hang out with your grandfather? Rarely. Rarely are you around masculine presence that you would have been years prior. So all this knowledge isn't even getting passed down from generation to generation anymore. Your father goes to work, he shows up at night, goes to sleep, has to rinse and repeat to barely survive in this insane world where the economic situation is so untenable for a vast majority of people. And so it creates this entire broken system where each generation down the line learns less and less and less and becomes more and more lost, more and more susceptible to ideas like gender ideology, more unhappy, more dependent on strong pharmaceuticals. And then boom, just a few generations down the line, you have the society we're enveloped with today. There you go. And it's people asking this question of like, how did we go so wrong? It's like anybody with half a brain looking backwards could tell you exactly at what point we started heading in the wrong direction and where we're going. The scary part is if you keep following this strand into the future, it's not going to end well.
Enough bringing disgrace.
I was so lucky, man, when I was born, because in Romania, people have kids young. I was lucky to speak with my great grandparents. I had both great grandparents alive. I had a great grandpa and a great grandma. It was absolutely insane. Absolutely. When I last visited Romania as a teenager, this was way back. When I visited and I saw my great grandpa, I was all ears listening to what this man had to say. He lived a life I could not even imagine. I could not imagine what life was like back in his day and the experiences and the wisdom he shared. It was crazy, man. The concept of a great grandpa blew my mind away. I wish as a little kid I would have spent more time listening, but you're a little kid, you don't know any better. Because that time you can't get it back. They're no longer with me. Obviously, they've passed away. but this is something I would like to provide my kids. I would like my kids to have this kind of access. That's why, for me personally, I've been thinking about this. How do we raise successful families as men? Because the deepest, greatest source of not only happiness, but what could you say? You can draw so much from having a family, like sense of self-worth, fulfillment, correct? So the deepest source of motivation, fulfillment, and happiness, a man gets purpose as well. A man gets from having a family. I've spoken to my friends that have become fathers that are successfully shepherding families. There's a switch in you as a man that gives you a level of motivation and fulfillment that you can't replicate with anything else in this world, period. To see your wife, your woman, and your children happy, fed, leading them successfully under your own roof as a man that you provide, you cannot draw a greater source of fulfillment from anything else in this world. I'm telling you, and these guys are high performer, type A, some of them multimillionaires, others brutally get in the cage, fight, professional fighters. All of them say the same thing. There's nothing that compares to a wife and a kids, period. And I think the most important thing a man can do today when shepherding or working on shepherding a family is to, if you can, live close or bring your parents into the fold or her parents. Try to establish a large familial bond that's multi-generational. To have your children around your father and mother, your grandmother or grandfather, if still alive, is so valuable you can't put a price on it. To have your children around other family like uncles and aunts, brothers and sisters, to have them come over to your house often, for you to go over their house often, to celebrate often together, that kind of social conditioning, that kind of socialization in general is worth more than millions of dollars. That sets your kid up, your progeny, for success far beyond education, far beyond money, far beyond anything you could ever imagine. I'm telling you, I think this is the secret. I think this is the key. My ultimate goal is to have my parents and the rest of my family that's still living around me in very close proximity, like buying a house across the street, literally, for family, so that we can just go back and forth with one another to build strong familial bonds. We don't even have nuclear families here in the West anymore, let alone extended families. I think that is the key. I think that's where you create the least damaged people, and the ones that are strongest. They have the strongest foundation to stand on their own and think on their own critically instead of being brainwashed morons from social media. I think that's key.
On us as a gender, but the problem there, and then I'll stop my little tirade, is that most of the women I know who are sane are busy doing sane things, right? They're off, they have their career, they have their family, they're quite occupied, and they don't seem to have the time or maybe even the interest to go after their crazy harpy sisters. And so I don't see any regulating force for that terrible femininity. And it seems to me to be invading the culture and undermining the masculine power of the culture in a way that's, I think, fatal. I really do believe that.
I too believe that these are symptomatic of the decline of Western culture, and it will just go down flat. I don't think people realize that masculinity still exists, okay, in the world as a code among jihadists, okay, and when you have passionate masculinity, okay, circling the borders like the Huns and the Vandals during the Roman Empire, that's what I see. I see this culture rotting from within, okay, and disemboweling itself literally. Now I have an overview of why we're having these problems, right? And it comes from the fact that I'm the product of an immigrant family. All four of my grandparents and my mother were born in Italy. So I remember from my earliest years in this factory town in upstate New York, where my relatives came to work in the shoe factory. I can remember still, okay, the life of the agrarian era, okay, which was for most of human history, okay, the agrarian era, where there was the world of men and the world of women, and the sexes had very little to do with each other. Each had power and status in its own realm, right? And they laughed at each other in essence, okay? The women had enormous power. In fact, the old women ruled, not the young, beautiful women like today. Okay? But the older you were, the more you had control over everyone, including the mating and marriage. There were no doctors, so you had the old women were like midwives and knew all the ins and outs of this inherited knowledge about pregnancy and all these other things. Right? I can remember this and the joy that women had with each other all day long. Okay, cooking with each other, companions to each other, talking, conversing. My mother remembered as a small child in Italy when it was time to do the laundry. They would take the laundry up the hill to the fountain, Il Sorgo, okay, and do it by hand. They would sing, they would picnic, and so on, all right? And we get a glimpse of that in the Odyssey when Odysseus is thrown up naked on the shores of Phaeacia, all right? And he hears the sound of women, young women laughing and singing, and it's Nausicaa, the princess, bringing the women to do the laundry. Okay, it's exactly the same thing, all right? So there was each gender had its own hierarchy, its own values, its own way of talking, and the sexes rarely intersected. Like I can remember in childhood, on a holiday, typical, it could be a Christmas, it could be a Thanksgiving, whatever, the women would be cooking all day long, everyone would sit down to eat, okay, and then after that, okay, the women would retire en masse to the kitchen, and the men would go, I would look at it through the window and see all the men would be all outside, usually gather around the car, okay, at a time when cars didn't work as well as they do today, with the hood up, okay, and the men would be standing with their hands on their hips like that, everyone's staring at the engine, okay, and I went, yeah, that's how I learned, okay, men were refreshing themselves by studying something technical and mechanical after being with the women, okay, during the dinner, okay, so all of these problems of today are the direct consequence of women's emancipation and freedom from housework, thanks to capitalism, okay, which made it possible for women to have jobs outside the home for the very first time in the 19th century, no longer to be dependent on husband or father or brother, right? And so this great thing that's happened to us, that allowing us to be totally self-supporting, independent agents, has produced all this animosity between men and women, because the women feel unhappy. Women today, wherever I go, whether it's Italy or Brazil or England or America, okay, or Toronto, okay, the upper middle class professional women are unhappy, miserable. And they don't know why they're unhappy. They want to blame it on men, okay? The men must change. Men must become more like women. No, that is the wrong way to go, okay? It's when men are men, okay, and understand themselves as men, are secure as men, then you're going to be happier.
Yeah, well, there's nothing more dangerous than a weak man.
Yeah, absolutely, okay, and especially all these quislings, okay, spouting feminist rhetoric when I hear that. Okay.
Quislings. That's a good way to say a bug sandwich eater. She's going in. Told you she's based.
It makes me sick. But here's the point. Men and women have never worked side by side, ever. Maybe on the farms, okay, when you were like, maybe one person's in the potato field, the other one's over here in the doing tomatoes or whatever, okay? You had families working side by side, exhausted with each other, no time to have any clash of this. It was a collaborative effort on farms and so on. Never in all of human history have men and women been working side by side. And women are now the pressure about Silicon Valley. They're also sexist. Oh, they don't allow women in and so on. The men are being men in Silicon Valley, all right, and so on. And
especially the engineers.
And the women are demanding that, oh, this is terrible, you're being sexist. Maybe the sexes, okay, have their own particular form of rhetoric, their own particular form of identity, okay?
And that's exactly what got her canceled, talking like this, saying that men and women have separate specialties that they generally go for. You know, like men loving things, women loving people. And so you have a lot of nurses that are women and a lot of men that are engineers. But you can't, in the postmodernist society we live in today, where a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man, and that there are no behaviors rooted in biology, you can't say that in general, men go towards this direction, women go towards that direction. You can't. Yep.
Maybe, okay, we need to re-examine, okay, this business about, maybe we have to perhaps accept some degree of tension and conflict between the sexes, okay, in a work environment. I don't mean harassment. I'm talking about women feeling disrespected, how somehow their opinions when they express them, okay, are not taken seriously. Or even Hillary Clinton is complaining. Oh, when women write something online, she's attacked immediately.
I also noticed these things as a small business owner, that once you hire women or you start hiring women, the space changes completely. I don't know if this or if anybody here that works in small specialized teams for other businesses can speak on this, but it starts to get infantilized in a way. Typically, imagine like a group of engineers working day and night, traveling, maybe all sharing a hotel. The moment you invite, say, a female engineer, it starts to get more lax. Less work gets done. It becomes less competitive and more about nurturing the environment and the quote vibes. And then now it becomes, the men start acting different too. And now it becomes all of a sudden you need 2 rooms. You need multiple rooms for each person. Or the hotel when the business has to travel somewhere. And productivity, bonding, and that tight-knit competitive group starts to dissolve before your very eyes. That turns toxic, almost like high school cliquish energy is now invited into the team. From what I have noticed, from the conversations I have, I'm sure not all, okay? But when you look at something like that one viral video before Elon fired all these morons at Twitter about the hard day that chick was having going into work at Twitter, where she had her coffee and then her little massage and then had her yoga class. Like, this is a goddamn business. What do you mean? You're going for yoga after a 10-minute conversation of some team meeting. I got to distress because it was so hard. That's why he fired all these morons. And now Twitter's running better than it ever has with a tenth of the workforce.
Immediately, and so on. Well, everyone's attacked online. What are you talking about? The world is tough. The world is competitive. Okay, identity is honed. Okay, by conflict. The idea that there's really no conflict, that we have to be in this bath. Okay, of approbation.
Yes.
And, which is
well,
just,
that's the devouring
infantile.
mother. That's right. It's absolutely infantile. I mean, okay. So a couple of things there. Well, the first thing is that the agreeableness trait that divides men and women most. There's three things.
Dude, yeah, the culture was so insane just to cater to women. Twitter had rest pods. Can you imagine giving men rest pods? Grab a blanket, a pillow, and sleep on that hard-ass floor over there, Ted. Fuck you talking about rest pods. So dumb. We're catering to morons that don't provide any value to companies. It's unfortunate. Josh, software engineer here. The environment absolutely changes. The banter and sarcasm that brings about learning and cohesion disappears. Oh, yeah. Say goodbye to jokes the moment you invite women into space. Everybody's got to be tippy toes around every single conversation, can't offend, can't have a accusation lobbied at you. You know, they're going to sick that stupid ass department on you. What is it? What's that department called? Where they're basically there to just empower women these days. Damn, it's not coming to my mind. HR, there you go. Human resources. The most useless department that some smart companies are already starting to cut off. Human resources. I'm going to go to human resources and tell on you. Get out of here.
Things that divide women and men most particularly from the psychometric perspective. One is that women are more agreeable than men. And so that seems to be the primary maternal dimension as far as I can tell. It's associated with a desire to avoid conflict, but it's associated with interpersonal closeness, compassion, politeness. Women are reliably higher than men, especially in the Scandinavian countries and in the countries where egalitarianism has progressed the farthest. So that's where the difference is maximized, which is one of the things James Damore pointed out quite correctly in his infamous Google memo. Okay, women are higher in negative emotion, so that's anxiety and emotional pain. That difference is approximately the same size. And again, that maximizes.
Oh, yeah, and I've seen that real cringe material from HR now. Somebody said they now have gender diversity resources now. Yes. I would love to walk into one of these to be educated on how I should treat my BIPOC coworkers. I need to watch my whiteness. My inherent racism. Yeah. Are you shitting me, dude? Oh, man. Man, oh, man. America, turn this around, please.
This is in egalitarian societies, which is extremely interesting. And then the biggest difference is the difference in interest between people and things. And so women are more interested in people and men are more interested in things, which goes along quite nicely with your car anecdote. But the thing about men interacting with men, again, is that it isn't that they respect each other's viewpoints. That's not exactly right. What happens with a man, and I know a lot of men that I would regard as remarkably tough people, for one reason or another. And everything you do with them is a form of combat. If you want your viewpoint taken seriously, often you have to yell them down. And like, they're not going to stop talking unless you start talking over them. You know, and it's not like men are automatically giving respect to other men, because that just doesn't happen. It's that the combat is there and it's expected. And one of the problems, and so this is part of the reason why I think men are bailing out of so much of academia and maybe the academic world in general, and maybe the world in general, is that...
Man, nothing more cringe than seeing a name tag on a poor, lowly, like hourly wage worker forced to have pronouns on there. Nothing more cringe than that. And you know, like, they can't be like, just don't put that shit on there, please. I don't believe in this. It's like you have to choose. Yes, thank you. You're a she, her. I would have never guessed.
Men actually don't have any idea how to compete with women, because the problem is that if you unleash yourself completely, then you're an absolute bully. And there's no doubt about that, because if men unleash themselves on other men, that can be pretty goddamn brutal, especially for the men that are really tough. And so that just doesn't happen with women ever. But so you can't unleash yourself completely. If you win, you're a bully. If you lose, well, you're just bloody pathetic. So how the hell are you supposed to play a game like that? I've worked with lots of women in law firms in Canada, for example, and high achieving women, like really remarkable people, I would say. And they're often nonplussed, I would say, by the attitude of the men in the law firm, because they would like to see everyone pulling together because they're all part of the same team. Whereas the men are like at each other's throats in a cooperative way, because they want the law firm to succeed, but they want to be the person who's at the top of the success hierarchy, right? So, and that doesn't jive well with the more competitive or cooperative ethos that's part and parcel of agreeableness. And so we don't really have any idea how to integrate male and female dominance hierarchies.
Exactly.
Yeah, men succeed in a high competitive, cutthroat environment. They create natural hierarchies that are usually typically based in, what would you say? Capability, I think is a good way to put it. Competence, yeah. How capable a man is typically where he lands on the hierarchy and respect of other men. So when you have a corporation, typically competent men are at the top, and the ones working their way up gain competence slowly and then become more respected. Thus, they'll get the promotions. Thus, they become, quote, the competent men at the top eventually. Men have this naturally built in, whether it goes into a corporate environment, that's some cutthroat law business, or back in the days when we had spears in our hands and we went hunting. The guy who could throw the spear the furthest, the fastest, had the highest kill count, was always the most successful hunter, garnered the most respect from all the other men, would teach all the other men. Then the other men became more competent. As a result, there was a structure there, a natural hierarchical structure that men built based on competence. Yeah, a natural meritocracy. And that led to the success of those tight units. That's why men succeed so much in these highly competitive environments, because there's a level of respect and admiration here that men have for men that are better than you at something. It's not seen as a threat, an enemy. Okay, this is a person that merits his position, as opposed to women that are more successful in these kind of co-op style situations where they come together as a whole. Imagine, if we're going to use that spear analogy in the tribal times, imagine picking fruits and stuff, They're going to all go together in a little co-op group, and they're going to pick the fruits together, and she's going to go over here with that lady's going to go over there, and they're going to be all in close proximity working together picking the fruits, and instead of like men having to plan a hunt where you have to have like advanced tactics and you need to pick the guy who could throw the spear the best, and then you have to talk to the guy who's the trapper, and then you have to come up with a strategy of pinning the animal in like a kill zone, and you and the other guy has to go over here and do a pincer there, and you know what I mean? It's just different, where men understood the different skills they had within the group, and we would have to leverage those in the highest form possible in order to be successful. Women don't necessarily have to do that level of planning when you co-op. It's just supposed to be a group effort. We have to just all get together and try, and it'll all be great. It's just way different, man. The approach is completely different. You can't have Ted the Riri with a spear who can't hit a goddamn mountain if he tried. Nobody's eating that day. But maybe he's really good at trapping, at making snares. So you put his ass on the snares. The dude's got an eye for animal trails. He's the best at snaring. You don't put his ass on the spears, bro. We're not all trying to die here and starve to death. Another dude's really good at building shit or working with metal or wood or whatever. We understand the value in each other individually, not as a group. And then we come together, put that all into one like well-oiled machine to succeed. This is how men work.
That's exactly right. This is why I love this show, Real Housewives, which is
Yes.
Boris and Scorns. And just last night, I was watching an episode, where the women were at each other, at a party and recounting. But I said this to you, but you said this to me, and the men got together there and said, well, this is the way they communicate, with each other. And men, we men, just will have a fist fight, and 10 minutes later we're going to have a beer at the bar next to each other, and so on. And I have observed that my entire
my
life.
daughter used to be really irritated about that, because she like most people was the target of feminine conspiratorial bullying at one. She's no pushover, my daughter, so it wasn't like this was a continual thing or that she didn't know what to do about it, but she had observed these girls conspiring against her and then blackening her name on Facebook, which is part and parcel of the typical female bullying routine, which is often reputation demolition, right? That there's a good literature on that. And then she'd watch what would happen if my brother or my son would have a dispute with his friends, and maybe they were drinking and there was a dispute. They'd have a fight, and then the next day they were friends again. And that's another thing that's strange, is that men have a way of bringing a conflict to a head and resolving it, right? And that it isn't obvious to me that women have that same, perhaps you might call it a luxury, but it's also the case that men don't know what to do when they get into a conflict with a woman, because what the hell are you supposed to do? Mostly what you're supposed to do is avoid it.
Well, I've seen, I don't know whether this crosses into other countries, but that there's a certain kind of taunting and teasing that boys do with each other that toughens them, okay, and where they don't take things seriously. But a girl's feelings become extremely hurt if she hears something that's very tough, sarcastic against her. So I do feel that there are profound differences between the sexes in terms of emotions, in terms of communication patterns. My father used to say that he could never follow women's conversations. He said women don't even finish sentences. The women understand immediately what the other woman is saying, okay, and in the way that women tend to be more interested, or have been traditionally more interested in soap operas, it's not just that the women were home without jobs. It's that honestly, I believe that soap opera does mirror the way women talk to each other. There's these communication patterns that have been built up through women, the world of women, okay, which was, it made sense there was a division of labor, okay. It wasn't sexism against women that there was a division of labor. The men went off to hunt and did the dangerous things. The women stayed around the hearth because you had pregnant women, nursing women, older women, okay, they were cooking and so on. So I feel that these communication patterns that we're talking about have been built up, okay, over the centuries. And the men had to toughen each other, okay, to go out. The hunting parties of Native Americans, they could be gone for 2 weeks, and when the temperature was below zero, okay, many of them died. Okay, the idea that somehow, any kind of separation of the sexes or different spheres of the sexes is inherently sexist.
And inherently driven by a power dynamic.
The answer to all of this, okay, everything that we're talking about, okay, is education into early history, okay, until people understand the Stone Age, the nomadic period, the agrarian era, and how civilization built up, okay, in Mesopotamia, the great irrigation projects, or in Egypt, okay, where you had for the first centralized government authority became necessary, okay, to master these. You had a situation where an environmentally, difficult situation like the deserts of Mesopotamia, or the peculiar character of Egyptian geography, where you can only have a little tiny fertile line along the edges of the Nile, okay, an otherwise desert landscape. So this civilization and authority, okay, right, as not necessarily about power grabbing, but about organization to achieve something for the good of the people as a whole.
Yes, that's exactly the symbolism of the great father.
By reducing all hierarchy to power, okay, and selfish power, okay, it is utterly naive. It's ignorant. Right? So I say education has to be totally reconstituted, including public education, to begin in the most distant past. So our young people today, who know nothing about how the world was created that they inhabit, okay, can understand, okay, what marvelous technological paradise they live in, and it's the product of capitalism, it's the product of individual innovation, most of it's the product of a Western tradition that everyone wants to trash now, etc. If you begin in the past and show, and also talk about war, because the war is the one thing that wakes people up, okay, as we see. War is the reality principle. Yes, okay, war is the reality principle. My father and 5 of my uncles went to World War II, and my father was part of the force that landed in Japan, okay, he was a paratrooper, at the time of the Japanese surrender, okay, and a couple uncles got shot up and so on. When you have the reality of war, when people see the reality of the horrors of war, Berlin burned to a crisp and so on, starvation, all kind, then you understand, okay, this marvelous mechanism that brings water, to the kitchen, and you flip on a light, and the electricity turns on.
No, well, for me, and I suppose it's because I have somewhat of a depressive temperament. I mean, one thing that staggers me on a consistent basis is the fact that anything ever works. I mean, because it's so unlikely, to be in a situation where our electronic communications work, where our electric grid works, and it works all the time, right? It works 100% of the time. And the reason for that is that there are mostly men out there who are breaking themselves into pieces, repairing this thing, which just falls apart all the time.
Absolutely.
Right?
I said this in the Monk debate, okay, in Toronto several years ago. I said that there's the invisible, all these elitists, professors sneering at men. It's men who are maintaining everything around us. Okay? This invisible army, okay, which feminists don't notice. Right? Nothing would work.
Or regarded as oppressive, which is, like a professor is someone who's standing on a hill surrounded by a wall, which is surrounded by another wall, which is surrounded by another wall. Like it's walls all the way down. Who stands up there and says, "I'm brave and independent"? It's like you've got this protected area that's so unlikely. It's so absolutely unlikely. And the fact that people aren't on their knees in gratitude all the time for the fact that we have central heating and air conditioning and pure water and reliable food, it's
incredible.
It's absolutely unbelievable.
That's interesting because Once a nation undergoes like a very severe war, like World War II, it's stained on the psyche of the populace. So they go through life understanding just how fragile peace is. And then a few generations down the line where you have peace and you're in this bubble where you've had safety and security for so long, the next generation that comes along screws away all the progress. They can't appreciate just how fragile the system that they're in is actually. They can't appreciate the men that keep the system going. Like they were saying, the power is constantly on. And if it goes off, there's men on the power lines working to fix them right away. This invisible force of men that keeps everything going. All the roads paved, the power lines working, the ditches are all dug, everything, cables laid, everything and anything you can imagine are vastly a majority of men that maintain society that we're in today. And people forget, man, what a blessing it is and don't appreciate the average working man anymore. We see our shortcomings of, my avocado toast wasn't toasty enough. What a blessing it is to have that stupid ass problem. And because you're twiddling your thumbs up your ass all day with nothing to do, no real threat of survival, war, instability, you have to start pointing the finger. You have to start virtue signaling. You have to start to make yourself feel important, like you matter in the world. Pointing the finger and attacking someone or something. So you attack the system and say there's systemic oppression. You attack a group of people, say men, and say the patriarchy's holding you back. Or you attack a gender, for example, white men. It's popular today to shit on white men. And this is what these people do that are not, living. They're not based in reality, man. They don't understand how the real world works. They live in a bubble, a safe little bubble where their biggest worry in the world is how toasty and how much soy went into their latte. That's sad. War is a wake-up call. Whoever wrote that is correct. Once your life is in danger, you start to prioritize things that are truly important in your life.
People used to die for the water supply. Okay, it was contaminated with cholera, for heaven's sakes. Right? People don't understand. Okay, they have clean water, fresh milk, fresh orange juice. All of these things. These are marvelous.
And all of the time.
All of the time. Western culture is heading. Okay, because we are so dependent on this invisible infrastructure. We're heading for an absolute catastrophe when jihadists figure out how to paralyze the power grid. The entire culture will be chaotic. You'll have mobs in the street. Okay, within 3 days. Okay, when suddenly the food supply is interrupted and there's no way to communicate. There'll be like the robbery. I mean, that is the way Western culture is going to collapse. Okay, and it won't take much.
Single points of failure.
Because we are so interconnected, and now we are so dependent on communications and computers. I used to predict for years there will be an asteroid hitting there.
Yeah, well, do you know how the solar flares work? So this happens about once every century. So back about 1880, and I don't remember the exact year, there was a significant enough solar flare. So that produces an electromagnetic pulse, like a hydrogen bomb, because the sun is a hydrogen bomb. And electromagnetic pulse will emerge from the sun and wave across the earth, and it produces huge spikes in electrical current along anything that's electronic, and it'll burn them out. It lit telegraph operators on fire in the 1800s. And one of those things took out the Quebec power grid in 1985 and knocked out the whole Northeast corridor. And so they figure those things are about 1 in a century event. But those I have my brother-in-law, who's a very smart guy. He designed the chip in the iPhone. We were talking about political issues the last time I went and saw him in San Francisco, and his notion was that all that the government should be doing right now is stress testing our infrastructure the same way they stress test the banks, because we're so full of these single points of failure that, and I think you're absolutely right. Luckily, we've been, invaded by stupid terrorists instead of smart terrorists, because a smart terrorist could do an unbelievable amount of damage in a very short period of time. So, and it's just God's good graces that hasn't happened yet. And so,
and then what will happen is that it's the men, okay? The men will reconstruct civilization, while the women cower in the houses and have the men go out and do all the dirty work. That's what's going to happen again. Only men will bring civilization back again. Okay?
So now a couple of things. So the universities, I've proposed.
You mean if civilization collapses due to a massive solar flare knocking out the power grid, it won't be the pink and the green hairs coming to rebuild society?
Though it's something that's probably beyond my power, that what should happen is that the real content of the universities should be stolen back from the universities because they're not making use of their intellectual property, and that something should be started online that would constitute a genuine university. The problem is the accreditation issue, but I don't think that's an unsolvable problem. But do you see like all these people who have these postmodern neo-Marxist agendas are completely embedded inside the universities.
Oh, absolutely. Right? And the point is, over the last 25 years, I have received constant mail from people dropping out of the graduate schools, right, or giving up altogether on any idea of being a college professor. Okay, so what's happened is that the most talented and independent thinking people, okay, have avoided the school. So we're now, who we have are the compliant, the servile, okay, the people who are currently in the university and hiring their successors, yes. Okay, are mal-educated themselves, okay. I mean, one of the first letters I received in the early 90s, I'll never forget it, was from a woman who was now painting houses in Missouri and said she had been part of the comparative literature graduate program at Berkeley, and that she finally had to drop out because she said every time she would express enthusiasm for what they were reading, the people looked at her as if she had somehow created an offense. In other words, enthusiasm for art, okay, the very things you need as a teacher in the classroom, okay, were being trained out. Okay,
yeah, well, the thing is, if you respect art and literature, that means that you implicitly accept a hierarchy of quality, right? Yes. And that, of course, contradicts the fundamental tenets of the postmodern doctrine, which is that there are no hierarchies of quality. And you talked a little bit earlier about the idea that you referred again to the idea that everything is associated with power, and that's the thing that I can't help but associate with a kind of personality pathology. Like, from a psychometric perspective, the best predictors of long-term success in our society are intelligence, IQ, which you can measure very accurately, and trait conscientiousness, which actually is a real testament to the culture, right? Because what you'd hope is that the smart people who work hard are the people who advance. It isn't like they deserve it exactly. That isn't what I mean. It's that if the culture is harnessing the productive power of individuals properly, then it should differentially reward people who are smart and conscientious because they're going to do a bunch of really interesting work for the rest of us. And that's a very well-established finding. It's as good as any finding in the social sciences. But despite that, and despite the fact that everything works, which is a goddamn miracle of sorts, there is this consistent story that we live in a patriarchy, that it's only oppressive, that it's done nothing but oppress women since the beginning of time, which is also something that just boggles my mind, Like, I know that
men have sacrificed for women and children, including their lives, okay, for thousands of years. Yes, there's been brutality, but the brutality is in the minority, okay? Yes, this sick portrayal of human history is nothing but male oppression and female victimage, okay? This is a way to permanently ensure the infantilization of women.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, well, and you can even make the case from a purely logical perspective. So here's an interesting fact. So most of the people who abused their children were abused as children. But most of the people who were abused as children don't abuse their children, right? So if you look at the population of abusers, they were all abused. So you can say abuse causes abuse. But that's not a good idea because you have a specific sample there, right? It's not a random sample. What happens is that abuse dampens out over the centuries. It doesn't propagate itself. And that's obvious because if the hypothesis of essential male tyranny was true, it would spread exponentially through the population in like 3 generations and there wouldn't be an exception at all. And so what happens is even when there is a tilt towards tyranny, let's say in the family or even in the society, that regresses back to something that's far more benign very, very rapidly. And you see this, so...
To me, one of the biggest unexamined issues is the transition from the great extended family of old into the nuclear family. Okay? So I do feel that Freud is the best analyst of the particular kind of claustrophobic cell of the modern nuclear family. It could be that human beings were never intended to be trapped in a house just with their parents. The extended families, your aunts and grandparents and cousins, all of whom helped form your identity. Okay? So one's identity was as a member of a community, right? Rather than in this like hothouse environment. So I think that a lot of current issues, including the sudden spate of transgender claims and so on, that a lot of these things are coming from this unstable in cell. It's really a prison cell of a nuclear family. 2 parents perhaps cannot give all the knowledge of life to the young. And so I think there are all kinds of sexual issues.
That's an interesting point she makes. Maybe that as much as we laud the 2-parent household, it may not be ideal in raising kids. We may be shortchanging the young in our society by eradicating the extended household. Right? There's always that adage, it takes a village. Maybe that's actually true. Maybe having a 2-parent household isn't actually enough. Maybe it seems like it is when compared to the absolute worst of the worst, like a single mother household. Interesting, man, because the perspective we have today is just on the way society is, the framework of society today. That's all we have to compare. We can't reach back in history and actually experience and have the feelings and know what it was like to be raised, say, in our great-grandparents' time, right? So we don't know what system is actually the most effective. I have an inkling And based on what she said as well, and just from seeing other people that were raised in multi-generational homes, that those are far superior than the nuclear family. I think the nuclear family is like a degradation of the extended family that we were forced to accept in this capitalist system that we live today. And capitalism has become so corrupted today, where it's like crony capitalism or corporatocracy that we're living under, that you can't even afford a nuclear family anymore. Most people are now, because of the culture rot and the economic circumstances, are forced to live in this single parent family home, or get put in a system, or raised by the system while being in the single parent home, where you're essentially at school all day because your parents work or your parent works. I think this is this should be a matter of national security. But if you're one of the people at the very top, why would you ever make this a thing of national security when you benefit so much from it? When the amount of power you can extract from broken households, the amount of financial incentive that's there for you because you profit off broken people from the cradle to the grave. The system truly is designed to break you. The system is designed for you to fail because of everything I've said before.
That are generated by it, but with the psychology today is now simply a practical matter. People come in, the psychologist in the United States deals with your present problem. Let's not go into the distant past, okay? Let's just deal with our present problem, which obviously we have forms of communication. We need to fix this, and then you'll be fine. Okay? As a consequence, there's a complete absence of any kind of analysis of your experiences as a child with your parents, with your siblings and so on, how that might relate to your current sexual identity issues, whether it's transgender or whether it's homosexuality. It is you cannot possibly ask, about any genesis of homosexuality today, because that is automatically defined as homophobic. Well, excuse me, every single, as an openly gay person myself, every gay person I know, there's some story there, it seems to be in childhood. Not only that, there's a strange similarity of the storylines of all of my friends who are gay, There's the same pattern that had to do with blurred borderlines between a son and his mother and so on. I'm not blaming the mother, I'm not blaming the mother at all, What I see is a dynamic going on in the bourgeois house, the nuclear family, where you had sometimes a distant father, a father who was present but not really engaged, and a mother who made the son her companion in some way. Often the mother has great imagination and flair, and they had a shared thing. And the idea that homosexuality has nothing whatever to do, with your family life is nonsense.
It's also completely, that's another thing. And I got a lot of trouble in Canada for my opposition to Bill C-16, which was a bill that had to do with transgender rights, and I didn't really...
That's where the cancellation came. We won't even speak about it on here. She said what she said.
Give a damn about the transgender right issue. That had nothing to do with it. What bothered me was that there was an issue of compelled speech because you were required by the Ontario Human Rights Commission to use the pronouns of the person's choice, right? Otherwise,
and that is absolutely Orwellian.
That's right.
That is absolutely intolerable. I said years ago, that my book, Sexual Personae, which was like a 700-page book, I said that is the biggest sex change in history because I, with my transgender issues, looked at the magnificent construction of English. It was the English language, that I seized on to gain my identity and my power as a person, right? And therefore, any intrusion into English, someone trying to tell me how to use English, this great gift, to me, this is absolutely obscene and evil, for any government to try to dictate to us how we're going to use this magnificent instrument of English.
Yes, absolutely. And that was for me the breaking point because I believed, and I think that that's associated with the idea of the logos in the West, because that's a deep mythological idea that the logos is the thing that brings order out of chaos through communicative speech, and that's tightly aligned with your soul. And I don't care if you're an atheist or a believer, it doesn't matter. It's still the right language, and that no one has any right whatsoever under any circumstances to trespass against that. And so, but that's okay, because that's law in Canada now. And so, so now back to your, let's see, you were making a point about...
I knew we would agree on
yes, okay. Because it's interesting to look at these things obviously from multiple perspectives, which is another thing ideologues don't do, right? Because for them, everything is one cause. Yes. There's one. That's how you can tell when you're dealing with someone who's ideologically possessed, is they make everything attributable to a single cause, like power. Yes. So one of the things that's happened with the nuclear family that's quite interesting too is that parents are older and they have fewer children. Mm-hmm. So you could imagine that hothouse environment in some sense has been exaggerated for a bunch of reasons. One is, your child is a lot more valuable to you if you're older and you only have one or two, right? Because you're not going to get another chance. First of all, you might have had some trouble having the child to begin with, and you're not going to get another chance. So you've got all your eggs are in one basket, so to speak. And then, of course, children don't have the number of siblings they used to have. And one of the things that's really useful about having siblings is that they keep you in your place, right? They're primary socialization agents. And I mean, that can be brutal. I mean, that's reflected, say, in the story of Cain and Abel, you know, that internal household dynamic with siblings can really become murderous, and that has to be kept under control. But I think the hothouse flower person who's incapable of tolerating any jibes or any testing, any dominance hierarchy testing of the sort that you said that men do, part of that's the consequence of being raised by older parents who have excess resources, who have no siblings, because the child is then, of course, special. And that specialness, well, there seems to be an inverse relationship between that specialness that's protected and the person's robustness and resilience. And then that's cottoned to, or not cottoned to, that's pandered to by the universities, which insist upon setting up a situation where no one is ever offended by anything any of the time, and that's something I also can't understand at all. Because
let me just say that's a huge point you just made, okay? Because it's the upper middle class of this professional class, okay, who postpones having the children, okay? Because they go to law school, they go to medical school, right? and they have the children after they're settled, okay, in a job, okay? So they're the ones, okay, who have injected this hypersensitive bourgeois idea, you know, code into the universities. Now my parents were 20 when they married and 21 when they had me, okay? Yeah, right. My father was went to college on the GI Bill, getting out of World War II. So when I was born, my father was still in college and was sweeping the floors and so on. I am the product of young parents, and nature wants, actually, young parents, right? Because pregnancy is quicker, it's safer, right, okay, and so on. And my parents had the energy, okay, to this youthful energy, that can-do spirit that came out of World War II and so on. I'm a product of that. Then my only other sibling was born 14 years later, okay? My father at this point was a college professor, okay? All right? So she had completely different parents than I did. So she has very excellent manners and so on. She's completely different. Okay, right? And I have all this, like, the energy. I mean, my parents were just out of their teens. Okay? So now today we have this situation. And it's considered heresy to raise this issue. Okay, that you have young women are told, okay, there's one future for you. You are a future leader. Okay, you must move forward. Okay, 4 years of college and then perhaps some professional class. And so on. All right. So it maybe the young women's bodies are signaling, okay, that they want to be mothers. Maybe there are signals coming from the body, right, of maybe now wanting this system of education that was devised for men, okay, that's being funneled along, channeled along in this mechanism, all right? So young women, feel unhappy. They don't know why. They feel they have no sense of identity. If they want to marry and drop out of college, right, and have a baby, they will be treated as traitors to their class. Yeah. What? You are a future leader. What? Have a baby? Only working class women would do that. Okay. Yeah. Now, I find working class women, okay, in general, okay, far more rounded as personalities. Okay, they express themselves forcefully. They have body language that takes up space. Okay, a man says something to them on the street, they are right back in their face, and so on. It is the bourgeois girls, okay, who are taught that they're special, okay, who have to postpone actual life, okay, for all these years. You see, these are the girls who misjudge the fraternity parties setting. These are the girls who run for parental protection and hand-holding on the committee investigating what went wrong on their date, and so on and so forth.
Yep, and that explains the culture on college campuses today. Remember that chick that was it the false accusation where she had the mattress girl on college campus? That was a false accusation, correct? Do you guys remember that story? Or men in general just being falsely accused on a college campus and have to deal with the ethics board. And even though the police said the man wasn't guilty and investigated, the ethics committee can still kick you off and you lose your scholarship. That's wild. That's wild. Also, this makes sense why voting has gone in the way it's gone today and why so many women, I believe women tend to vote to expand government powers. Women want government to play daddy. Women want more government, more regulation, more rules. It's mostly men that vote for smaller government, less rules, less intrusive legislation.
So yes, I think that that you have located, that's very interesting. The idea that these young girls, okay, who are so sensitive, okay, in college, so unable to handle their sex life, are the product of older parents because they went through the professional career track, yeah, right? Mm. Yes, and they have not had the experience of the competitiveness, and teasing of other siblings. So they don't know how to.
Well, also, the thing about young parents is they don't care as much as older parents, and that actually turns out to be better, because what you really want for your children is minimum necessary intervention, right? And the developmental literature is actually quite clear on this. So if you're at home with your child, the best role that you can play is to be there. but not to be interacting with the child all the time. The child should be off doing whatever it is the children do, which generally is playing with other children, right? Without it being mediated also by screens and technology, because that's how they formulate their identity. And that's how they learn to play joint games with other people. And the parent is supposed to be there as a recourse for the child when they go out a little bit farther than they can tolerate and they have to come back and get some security. And so, but that's especially not what happens to single children, because they're basically raised as miniature adults. So, and I wonder too, like, how much of the antipathy towards, these are dark musings, and I would say how much of the antipathy towards men that's being generated by, say, college-age women is deep repugnance for the role that they've been designed, and a disappointment with the men, for who, you know, like you think of those, is it Carpathian, I can't remember the culture. The basic marital routine was to ride into the village and grab the bride and run away with her on a horse, right? It's like the motorcycle gang member who rips the two naive girl out of the bosom of her family.
The Sabine women, it's like an ancient myth. Yeah, there used to be bride stealing. It was quite widespread.
Right. Yeah. Well, so I kind of wonder if part of the reason that modern university-age women aren't so angry is because that fundamental feminine role is actually being denied to them, and they're objecting to that at a really, really fundamental level, like a level of primitive outrage at. Well,
what's happened is the chaos that my generation of the 1960s bequeathed through the sexual revolution. When I arrived in college in 1964, the colleges were still acting in loco parentis, in place of the parent. So at my dormitory, all women's dormitory, we women had to sign in at 11 o'clock at night. The men could run free the entire night. So it was my generation of women that rose up and said, give us the same freedom as men have. And the colleges replied, no, the world is dangerous, you could be raped, we have to protect you against rape. And what we said, was, give us the freedom to risk rape, and so that today's women don't understand. It's a freedom that you want. It's the same freedom that gay men have when they go and they pick up a stranger someplace. They know it's dangerous. They know they could end up beaten up or killed, but they find it hot. If you want freedom, if you want equality, then you have to start behaving like a man. So what we did is we gave freedom to these young women for several generations, but my generation had been raised in a far more resilient and robust culture. We had the strength, to know what we wanted and to fight for what we wanted. These young women have been raised in this terribly protected ways. Right? So I think in some strange fashion that all these demands for intrusion from these Stalinist committees, sexual investigating dates and so on, it's a way to reinstitute the rules that my generation threw out the window. So I think these young women are desperate. Not only that, but I have spoken out very strongly in a piece I wrote for Time magazine, as in my most recent book, that raising the drinking age in this country, from 18 to 21, has had a direct result, in these disasters of binge drinking fraternity parties, because to let college students, the way we could, go out as freshmen, have a beer, sit in a protected adult environment, learn how to discourse with the opposite sex in a safe environment, right, and so on. And now today, because of the stupid rule that young people can't even buy a drink, in a bar until they're 21, we have these fraternity parties that are like it's a caveman era. Well, of course, in this modern age, this disadvantages men. Men want to hook up, men want to have sex. Women don't understand what men want. Women like put out because they're hoping that maybe the man will continue to be interested in them. The man just wants experience. The hormones drive toward. To me, I've theorized. That the sex drive in men is intertwined with hunt and pursuit.
Yes.
And so I feel absolutely this is what women don't understand. And if women understood what I understand from my transgender perspective, all right, these women on the streets. I'm obviously Madonna admirer, and I support pornography and prostitution. So I don't want what I'm about to say to seem conservative. It isn't. What I'm saying is the women on the street, young women, who are jogging, with no bra on, short shorts, and have earbuds in their ears, just jogging along like this. I saw these women do not understand the nature of the human mind. They do not understand the nature of psychosis, and this intertwining that I'm talking about, of the hunt and pursuit thing, They're triggering a hunt thing, just what you have talked about in terms of the zebra herd, They are triggering the hunt, impulse, in psychotic men, to have here. There goes a very appetizing and totally oblivious animal, bouncing along here. So, and we're in a period now where psychosis is not understood at all. Young women have had no exposure to movies like Psycho. The kind of the rapist, serial murderer thing, and so on. The kind of strange dynamic that has to do with the assault on the mother imago, in the mind of the psychotic. So I think there's an incredible naivete. These young women are emerging and going to college, and in this incredible Dionysian environment of orgiastic sexual experience in fraternity houses. They're completely unprepared for it, right? And so you're getting all this outrage. So feminist rhetoric has gotten more and more extreme in its portrayal of men as evil. But in fact, okay, what we have is a chaos. It's a chaos in the sexual realm. The girls have not been told anything real, I mean, in terms of biological substratum to sexual activity.
And there's full of lies about what constitutes consent, too.
Exactly.
And it's become something that's essentially portrayed linguistically as a sequence of progressive contracts, which, I think, I've thought for a while that we're living in the delusional fantasy of a naive 13-year-old girl. That's basically sums up our culture. And
there you go. Pay attention, man.
I look at all these sexual rules that permeate the academia, and I think two things. The first thing I think is, I know because I was an alcohol researcher for a long time, and you know that 50% of violent crimes are directly attributable to alcohol. So if you're murdered, there's about a 50% chance that you're drunk, and about a 50% chance that the person who kills you is drunk. And alcohol is the only drug that we know that actually amplifies aggression. It does that in laboratory situations. Plus, it's a great disinhibitor, right? So what alcohol does is it doesn't make you oblivious to the future consequences of your action. Because if you ask someone who's drunk about the consequences of something stupid, they can tell you what the consequences are. But it makes you not care. And it does that because it's technically an anxiolytic, like barbiturates or like benzodiazepines, and it also has an activating property for many people who drink. So it's a stimulant and an anxiolytic at the same time, and a very, very potent. It's very potent for both of them. And we put young people together and douse them in alcohol, right, at the binge drinking level, and then which also interferes with memory consolidation, which of course makes things much more complex. And then we're surprised when there are sexual misadventures, and then it's also attributed almost purely to the predatory element that's part and parcel of masculinity, but a tremendous amount of that is also naivety and stupidity. Yes. Because we expect 18-year-old guys, especially the ones that haven't been successful with girls, which is like 85% of them, because the successful men are a very small percentage of men. The 85% who haven't been successful with men or with women, they don't know what the hell they're doing at all, right? And part of the reason they're getting drunk is to garner up enough courage to actually make an advance. Yeah. And because I think another thing that women don't understand, especially with regards to young men, is just exactly how petrifying attractive woman who's of, say, somewhat higher status actually is to a young guy. And there's lots of guys that write me constantly, and people that I've worked with, that are so terrified of women they can't even talk to them. Right. It's very, very common.
Well, I take a very firm position, which is that I want college administrations to stay totally out of the social lives of the students. Yeah. Right? If a crime is committed, it should be reported to the police. I've been writing that for 25 years now. Right? But it's not the business of any college administration to take any notice, okay, of what the students say to each other, as well as do with each other. Okay? I want it to totally stop. It is fascism of the worst kind.
I agree. Well, I think it's fascism of the worst kind because it's a new kind of fascism. It's partly generated by legislation. So like the Title IX memo that was written in 2011, yes. I recently got a copy of that goddamn thing. That was one polluting bit of legislation. That memo basically told universities that unless they set up a parallel court system, they were going to be denied federal funding. Unbelievable. It is absolutely unbelievable.
Incredible. And the leftists are supporting this.
I know.
And this shows there is no authentic campus leftism. I'm sorry, it's a fraud. Okay. I mean, the faculty should be fighting the administrations on this.
Yeah. What's insane about the left today? There's this funny meme about two cars with a bunch of stickers on them. And the real leftists would be anti-government, peace signs everywhere, my body, my choice type of stuff, anti-three-letter agencies, breaking down borders, populist narratives, the working man, power for the working man, stuff like that. And then now what leftist means is basically like a government fascist, like you're supporting tyranny. You're for the FBI investigating memes on Twitter. You're for people who didn't get the jab to get locked up. If you didn't wear your mask, you were for calling in the COVID snitch lines. You remember that? You remember those? They were actively calling in to snitch on people that didn't have their mask on properly. What the left has turned into today, it's almost like it's been infiltrated by the capitalists at the top because that was probably the last threat that they had to overcome. Similar to how the government didn't truly want a free and open news. I mean, journalism to be truly free and open means you have to critique the government and turn over some stones that would make the government look, less than perfect. You would have to expose all the dirty things that would be happening behind closed doors. Can't have that. Instead, you're going to take over the microphone. You're going to take over all the newspapers, all the media organizations, and you're going to start to work with them in order to propagate all your messages. Hello, propaganda. hello, people tuning into CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and getting basically a version of what the government wants or the party wants. You know, Team Red on Fox, Team Blue on CNN. Literally, if you go to a gym, I remember watching this and it blows my mind. You know, when you're on like a treadmill and you're running and they'll have like 6 screens all next to each other. One of them would have been on Fox News, one on MSNBC, one on whatever, all the news media organizations, all covering the same story, all with slightly altered headlines. Team Red would say, blame the Democratic president. Team Blue would blame the Republicans. And then you get to see these side by side, how they're playing people against one another, stoking fear, you know, playing that whole fear porn mongering thing going on that scares people into voting in a direction, man. It's all a game. It's a setup while your pockets are getting fleeced. Crazy.
Fighting that federal regulation of how we're supposed to behave on campus?
Well, how can you be so naive and foolish to think that taking an organization like the university, which already has plenty to do, and forcing it to become a pseudo-legal system that parallels the legal system could possibly be anything but utterly catastrophic? It would mean you would have to know absolutely nothing about the legal system and about the tremendous period of evolution that produced what's actually a stellar system and an adversarial system that protects the rights of the accused and of the victim, and to replace that with an ad hoc bureaucracy that has pretty much essentially the same degree of power as the court system with absolutely none of the training and none of the guarantees. And
kangaroo courts.
There are kangaroo courts.
That piece that I wrote about date rape, it was in January 1991 Newsday, the most controversial thing I ever wrote in my entire career. I attacked the entire thing and demanded the colleges stand back and get out of the social lives of the students, so on. And people, the reaction, people tried to they called the president of my university, tried to get me fired. You can believe the hysteria, okay? Right?
I can believe it.
Well, yes, you can
I
believe
can believe
it.
it.
You can believe it.
Yeah.
Right? Anything that says to women, okay, that they should be responsible for their own choices.
You see what she just said? Let's rewind that part real quick. Based OG. So I love her videos so much. Oh, man.
Yes, you can
I can believe it.
You can believe it.
Yeah.
Right? Anything that says to women, okay, that they should be responsible for their own choices is regarded as reactionary? Are they kidding me? Okay, this is such a betrayal of authentic feminism in my view.
Well, it's the ultimate betrayal of authentic feminism because it's an invitation of all the things that you might be paranoid about with regards to the patriarchy back into your life, right? It's an insistence that the most intrusive part of the tyrannical king come and take control over the most intimate details of your life.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible.
And the assumption is that that's going to make your life better rather than worse, right?
And not to mention this idea of the stages of verbal consent, as if your impulses based in the body have anything to do with words and so on. I mean, that's the whole point is about sex, okay, is to abandon, that part of the brain that's so and entrammeled with words. I mean, but you see these.
It's actually a marker of lack of social ability to have to do that, because if you're sophisticated, it's not like if you're dancing with someone, it's not like you call out the moves, right? If you have to do that, well, you're more worse than a neophyte, right? You're an awkward neophyte, and anybody with any sense should get the hell away from you. And so, if you're reduced to the point where you have to verbally negotiate every element of intimate interaction, then
what a downer! Oh my God.
That yes, but what an unbelievably, what would you call it, naive and pathological view of the manner in which human beings interact. Yeah. There's no sophistication in that.
Well, what I'm worried about also in this age of social media, I've noticed as a teacher in the classroom that the young people are so used to communicating now by cell phone, okay, by iPhone, that they're losing body language and facial expressions, okay, which I think is going to compound the problem with these dating encounters, okay, because the ability to read the human face and to read little tiny inflections of emotion. I think my generation got that from looking at great foreign films with their long takes, okay, so you'd have Jean Moreau and Catherine Deneuve, okay, in like potential romantic encounters, and you could see the tiniest little inflections, right, that signal communication or sexual readiness or irony or skepticism or distance or whatever. Okay, so the inability to read other people's intentions. Okay, that I think this is going to be a disaster. I mean, I just noticed that how year by year, okay, the students are becoming much.
That's not me. All that police siren sound is from their recording.
More flat affect, okay? And they themselves complain that they'll sit in the same room with someone and be texting to each other, okay? Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a piece of evidence, too, that supports that to some degree. So women with brothers are less likely to get raped.
Aha!
And the reason for that is that they've learned that nonverbal language deeply, right? And they can spot the
Not only that, okay, but I have noticed, okay, in my career, okay, that women who have many brothers, okay, are very good, okay, as administrators and as business people, okay, all right, because they don't take men seriously, okay. They regard, they saw their brothers, they think their brothers are jokes, okay, but they know how to control men, okay, while they still like men, okay, they admire men, right. So this is something that I have seen, repeatedly. Okay?
Yeah, well, so that would be also reflective of the problem of fewer and fewer siblings.
Yes, that's right. Okay, yeah. I've noticed this in publishing. Okay, that the women.
In a dystopian future, not too far away from today, that will be the police coming after them for having this conversation.
Who have the job of publicist, okay, and rise to the top as manager of publicity, okay, their ability to take charge of men and their humor at men, and they have great relationships with men, okay, because they don't have the sense of resentment and worry and anxiety, and so on. They don't see men as aggressors, okay, right? And I think that's another thing too, is that as feminism, moved into its present system of ideology, okay, it has tended to denigrate motherhood, okay, as a lesser order of human experience, and to enshrine, of course, abortion. Now, I am 100% abortion rights. I belonged to Planned Parenthood for years until I finally rejected it as a branch of the Democratic Party, my own party, and so on. But as motherhood became excluded, as feminism became obsessed, okay, with the professional woman, okay, I feel that the lessons that mothers learn have been lost, okay, to feminism, okay, which is, okay, that if the mothers who bear boy children, okay, understand the fragility of men, the fragility of boys, they understand it. They don't see boys and men as a menace. They understand the greater strength of women. Okay, so there's this tenderness, and connectedness between the mother and the boy child. Okay, when motherhood is part of the experience. Okay, of women who are discussing gender. So what we have.
That's so key too. We see it all the time with these past feminists or used to be strong pro-women, this and that. The moment they have a boy, their entire perspective on the world changes and they start to think it's unfair. Funny how that only happens when they have their own son. Probably also a symptom of why society has the whole patriarchy is evil, this and that, when so many people aren't even having kids today. So women go under this notion, because they don't have boys and don't have to look after one, that all men are evil. That this entire narrative, the story that all men are, would absolutely disappear had they had some skin in the game like their own sons. But they don't. So they can only see it from their own greedy perspective. And greedy is the key word here, because everything they do is for themselves. Just look at the language that they use. What can you do for me? What do you bring to the table? You're lucky to be in my presence. You should DM me with a $50 Cash App. You're lucky I'm even going on this date, right? And then we're seeing this reaction from men is why simping culture has exploded too, without having real father figures present. With the demands that women have today and the masculinity that's lacking for men today, that they've become subservient. And they're basically trying to meet those needs of these, quote, broken women. Yeah.
Today is that this gender ideology has risen up on campuses where none of the girls, none of the students have married, none of them have had children, okay, and you have women, some of whom have had children, but a lot of them are lesbians or like professional women and so on, okay. So the whole tenderness and forgivingness, okay, and encouragement that women do to boys, okay, the fragility, they don't understand this hypersensitivity of boys is not understood, okay. Instead, boys are seen as somehow more privileged, okay, and somehow their energy level is interpreted as aggression. Okay? Potential violence and so on. Okay, right. So I think that what we would do better. Okay, if we would have, I have proposed. Okay, that colleges should allow the moment a woman is entered. Okay, she has entrance to that college for life. Okay, and that she should be free to leave. Okay, to have babies when her body wants to have babies, when it's healthy to have them. Okay. And then return, have the occasional course, okay, build up credits, and fathers, you might be able to do it as well, and so on, to get married women with children into the classroom. The moment that happens, it's happened after World War II, okay, where you had a lot of married guys in the classroom, okay, and so on, not yet that many women. The experience of a married person with a family, okay, talking about gender, but most of the gender stuff would be laughed out of the room, okay, if you had a real mother in there who had experienced childbirth and was raising boys, and so on. But I think that's also something that has led to this incredible artificiality and hysteria, okay, of feminist rhetoric.
there's another strange element to that, which is that on the one hand, the radical feminist types, the neo-Marxists, postmodernists, are very much opposed to the patriarchy, let's say, and that's that unidimensional ideological representation of our culture.
It has never existed. I mean, perhaps the word can be applied to Republican Rome, and that's it.
Well, and maybe it could be applied usefully to certain kinds of tyranny, but not to a society that's actually functional.
Victorian England, arguably, okay, but other than that, to use the word patriarchy in that slapdash way, so amateurist, absolutely, it just shows people know nothing about history, whatever, have done no reading.
So what confuses me about that is that despite the fact that the patriarchy is viewed as this essentially evil entity, and that's associated with the masculine energy that built this oppressive structure, the antithesis of that, which would actually be femininity, as far as I can tell, which is tightly associated with care and with child rearing, is also denigrated. So it's like the only proper role for women to adopt is a patriarchal role, despite the fact that the patriarchy is something that's entirely corrupt. So the hypothesis seems to be that the patriarchy would be just fine if women ran it. So no changes, it's just that it would just be a transformation of leadership, and somehow that would rectify the fundamental problem, even though it's hypothetically supposed to be structural. Okay, so I'm going to close with something. So, there are elements in my character that are optimistic. I've looked, for example, I worked for a UN committee and on the relationship between economic development and sustainability, and I found out a variety of things that were very optimistic, like the fact that the UN set out to have poverty between 2000 and 2015 worldwide and actually hit that by about 2010, right? So we're in the period of the fastest transformation of the bottom strata of the world's population into something approximating middle class that's ever occurred. And there's all these great technological innovations on the horizon, and it looks to me like things could go extraordinarily well if we were careful, but I'm not optimistic. And maybe that's me, I'm pessimistic, because I also see that there's 5 or 6 things happening, all of which appear at the level of catastrophe, that are all happening at the same time. And so one of the things that I'd like to ask you is, what do you see happening in the next 10 years in the universities or in culture at large? And I mean, you just put forward a proposal for the universities for the treatment of women, which I think is a very interesting one, because women do have a different time frame than men. But what the hell is the proper way forward? I've been encouraging young men to tell the truth and to take responsibility, and there's a huge market for that message. But I'm not convinced by any stretch of the imagination that it's enough. When you look forward and you try to be optimistic, what the hell do you see?
Well, in the largest scale, I'm concerned about the future of Western culture, because as a student of history, it looks too much to me like ancient Rome, okay, which became overexpanded, it was at the mercy of bureaucratic creep, okay, and
I can imagine one of them.
Yes, right, and Roman identity eventually got blurred, okay, in its incorporation of so many different cultures, which at first seemed like a healthy kind of multiculturalism, but eventually it overexpanded and simply collapsed of its own weight. So I am concerned about whether Western culture is in a rapid decline. I think it would be very easy, because we are so interconnected and so overcomplex, very easy to bring it to ruin. It would only take one major natural disaster to do that. But the universities themselves, I mean, I think people are all of a sudden in the United States much more attentive to issues of political correctness because of the riots at Berkeley, which was the capital of free speech. I mean, the free speech movement happened in the spring before I entered college in 1964. It's one of the great principles and inspirational stories of my entire life. Mario Savio's assertion of the supremacy of free thought and free speech. So I think that perhaps we might just have turned a corner, but it's going to take a very, very long time for the university to be reformed. I feel that the cafeteria menu of the university curriculum has to be abandoned. That we must return to historical courses that begin in the earliest period, the Stone Age and Antiquity, in order to give perspective to our present analysis of our present culture. I want 50 to 75% of college administrators fired, okay, and the money be transferred over, okay, to faculty, into libraries, into instruction. Okay, I think that obviously the way people are being trained right now, including at the public school level. Okay, is I think the public school level has gone to hell. Okay, when my mother came to the United States at the age of 6, the old public school system was very strict, and therefore she had excellent education. Got all A's in her even though she started out not speaking English, spoke without an accent, etc. Okay, so today this kind of feel-good public school education, which is a form of ideology and indoctrination right now. It's all about no bullying, okay, and so on, and not about anything.
And not even seriously about no bullying.
Yes. So I can tell in my own students. I mean, I've been teaching for 46 years, so I can tell the slow degradation of public school education. Okay, to the point now that the students have absolutely no sense of world geography, of world history. Okay, they know absolutely nothing. They don't know anything about wars. Okay, and the reality, the barbaric reality of most of human history. Okay, and what a
that's triggering.
Yeah, right. What a fantastic culture we live in, and so on. Now, identity politics itself has just got to stop. I mean, it was important once, okay? I was a rebel against the WASP, hegemony, okay, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant hegemony in American culture. It was suffocating. I was raised in the 1950s, right, when WASPs controlled corporations and education and politics and so on. And so identity politics was necessary once, okay? We asserted gay rights, okay, with the Stonewall Rebellion of 1969. We asserted, okay, the women's rights with the rebirth of second wave feminism in the late 1960s, okay? But this endless, okay, preoccupation with a fragmented identity. We must return to the authentic 1960s vision, which is about identity coming from consciousness, which transcends gender, which transcends all these divisions of race, okay, and ethnicity, okay, consciousness itself, okay, right? There's no sense of that any longer. That's what the 1960s taught.
Well, I see that as a complete abandonment of personal responsibility, because that consciousness, I think, symbolically, and I got a lot of this from Jung and also from Eric Neumann. I mean, that's the great logos of the West, right? That's the transcendent principle, which is respect for the primacy of individual consciousness. And what goes along with that primarily isn't individual rights, although that's built into it. I mean, that's the reason we have individual rights, is for respect for that. But the responsibility that comes along with being an individual instead of the member of some group, especially a victimized group, which is like I wrote an article with one of my students who had toured the mass grave sites in the former Yugoslavia, and had been exposed to that sort of thing. And one of the things that our research indicated was that the best predictor of genocide is victimization on the part of the group that produces the genocide, right? An accelerated sense of victimization, and then it's, well, we get them before they get us. So when everyone...
Pay attention to that part. Think about what's happening right now with a certain group and the mass tragedies that have been perpetuated just very recently. Very recently. I want to play that part again. Pay very, very close attention, because he already called this happening.
An article with one of my students who had toured the mass grave sites in the former Yugoslavia, and had been exposed to that sort of thing. And one of the things that our research indicated was that the best predictor of genocide is victimization on the part of the group that produces the genocide, right? An accelerated sense of victimization, and then it's, well, we get them before they get us. So when everyone's...
And if you're browsing Twitter or TikTok and you're seeing all the call to arms for this certain group and how they need to protect themselves from the other group, can't even get into it on here. I'm sure if you've browsed the internet, not on YouTube where everything's censored, but if you browse the internet somewhere on the other side of Twitter, you've seen those videos for calls to action.
It's being taught now that they're a victim, and no one seems to have any sense that that's part of the essential tragedy of being, that life is suffering, and that the world rests on a foundation of suffering. It's nothing to take personally, and it's something to take responsibility for, instead of blaming and resentment and all of the things that have polluted our universities and our culture.
Well, and there also was the abandonment, okay, of the of the canon. Okay, people asserted that the canon was the product of bias and again of a provincial elitism and so on. But in point of fact, as a student of history of the arts, okay, I can assure people that the canon, okay, overwhelmingly so, is the result of what artists have determined. Okay, we say a work is important, is canonical, because artists following it, okay, were influenced by it. We have this like beautiful cascading tradition of influence. All right, so it's another part of the Philistinism, okay, of current education, to believe that there are these external reasons, okay, for why a work lasts, why a work written 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago has global relevance.
As if it's some sort of political conspiracy that's based on power. As if anybody could even manage that, no matter how nefarious they were.
Right. But also, we in the 60s had the idea, okay, that there was a human sensibility, okay, that transcended individual nations and so on, right? And that there was this like rubric for cosmic consciousness, okay, this sense of the universe as a whole, and to see the human being in relationship to great eternal principles of life and death, mortality, and so on. Whereas Marxism is blind. Marxism is very narrow. All it sees is society, okay? It sees nothing beyond society. It doesn't see nature, okay? I mean, it's absolutely mad, okay? How you can have a system being taught, okay, in universities, right, which thinks that this tiny thing of society, okay, compared to the enormity and beauty of nature, okay, it should take all of our, absorb all of our energy and attention. So, I mean, I just think that there's like a parochialism, a provincialism, now a kind of, systematized elitism in our current education has just got to be rooted out. And I want to return to basics, great simplicities. All these faculty members teaching their little tiny courses that has to do with their own specialty. That's got to stop. Okay, people can pursue whatever they want in their private research as scholars. Okay, certainly that's necessary, but they must teach in the core curriculum, and people must decide what is crucial for an educated person to know. I do want a multicultural. I do want a global curriculum. Okay, I want all the cultures taught. Okay, right? This is not the answer. Marxism, this neo-Marxism in the universities, okay, is simply, it's lazy. It's a lazy way to assert multiculturalism without actually doing the research and the study of other cultures. Okay, all right.
That's a good one to close on.
This is one of his GOAT interviews. I love this one. Hope you guys loved it too. But I wanted to show you two incredible people, especially Camille. Not a lot of people know about Camille. But she's been on the right side of quite a bit.